Chapter 13:28. While they were talking, the huge hanging basket had successfully arrived at the castle of the Torito clan through the cable. It was already on the other side of the balcony where Luochu was. If they only looked at it, they wouldn't be able to see what happened next. But seeing Brother Luochu staring at the huge hanging basket, Elizabeth hesitated and asked, "Brother Luochu, you don't think it's good?" Hearing this, Miss Maid looked at Elizabeth with interest, but didn't say anything. This vampire girl had the same name as her student. Maybe it was just a coincidence. This vampire girl didn't look like her student 60 years ago in terms of appearance or race. But in this short period of time, because of Elizabeth, Yu Yi couldn't help but recall the young queen, the princess of that year. "Why do you ask?" Luochu asked casually. "Why do you think I don't think it's good?" Elizabeth's fingers seemed to be a little bit tighter. She didn't dare to look at Luochu's eyes and whispered, because we're keeping humans in captivity. Won't they feel disgusted?" "They?" Luochu smiled and said, "I'm talking about the humans living in the farm. They don't feel disgusted, so as a bystander, I don't have any reason to feel disgusted either. But for the human race, if they see with their own eyes one of their own being raised as food by another race, wouldn't they instinctively feel disgusted?" Elizabeth raised her head and said, "Grandpa always says that humans are very exclusive creatures. Although keeping ancient humans in captivity is the most common thing in the 13 ancient clans, I know that many people in the inhuman domain don't like the way the 13 ancient clans do it. And from time to time, some inhumans would attack the farm under the slogan of liberating the farm, so the 13 ancient clans set up patrol teams. In the beginning, they were just managing the farm, not patrolling all the time." "That's true." Luochu nodded. "I don't deny your words because this is a universal value that exists among humans. I don't feel disgusted, but I can't represent the views of others." "So, Brother Luochu, you really don't hate vampires drinking human blood?" Elizabeth asked nervously. Luochu suddenly said, "Perhaps, compared to vampires drinking human blood, what I have done, and what I will continue to do in the future, is more evil in your eyes." However, the vampire girl had never seen Luochu do anything as evil as the vampires sucking human blood. She even took Luochu's words as his way of comforting himself. Big Brother Luochu is really too gentle. Elizabeth could not help but secretly size him up again. What he couldn't forget. For vampires, the first person they sucked, he still couldn't forget the taste and feeling of that moment. "Your canine teeth are showing." Luochu smiled at this time. "Are you hungry?" Elizabeth hurriedly covered her mouth with a trace of panic and embarrassment. "No, it's not like that." "You didn't see it. You didn't see it." The vampire girl suddenly lowered her head and ran back to the room. "Very interesting ability," Miss Maid suddenly said at this time. "Is it because she has sucked Master's blood before?" Luochu shook his head. "It shouldn't be. When I let her suck my blood, I was in the identity of a human, just in the state of an ordinary person, there was nothing special. But the birth of such an ability is probably because she is a mixed blood, right? As her mother's side, the blood of the Knights of the Round Table also flows in her body." Miss Maid just smiled and said casually, "It seems that she likes you, Master." What else could Luochu say? He had already directly introduced the girlfriend at the beginning. In his opinion, this was already a very clear explanation, and there was no clearer explanation than this. But Boss Luo also felt that Miss Maid occasionally showed a little girlish attitude, which was very good. "Well, I suddenly want to go to the farm here to have a look." So, Boss Luo changed the topic and said half seriously, "Farm?" Miss Maid was surprised. Luochu nodded and said, "Just now, on the so-called food on the hanging basket, I saw something called happiness. So, don't you feel curious about the way these farms raise them?" Miss Maid had no objection. She would follow her master wherever he wanted to go, help him do whatever he wanted to do, and even do it in advance. All her ideas were basically based on the premise of the above 2 points. No matter when Luaccio first took over the club, or now, there was no change. Perhaps she needed to be more careful now. Then let's go and have a look. Yu smiled obediently. So, Luaccio took a step back. The moment he took a step back, he split into two. Mississippi Maid also took a step back and split into two at the same time. The argument between Zhong Luoyue and Maria seemed to have stopped when Luaccio and Yu returned to the room. Although the argument stopped, the two stared at each other. Obviously, this stop was not illegal because one side had won. It was just a kind of silence. At this time, Elizabeth removed a chair in the room and started a fire in the fireplace, to boil water. As the headquarter castle of the Torito clan, there was nothing here that could be used to greet humans except for blood products. She didn't want to be too rude, but there was no other way, so the vampire girl could only think of such a way, to boil water on the spot. Of course, there was still water, even vampires needed to clean their bodies. The bathroom in the room could provide clean water, definitely not bath water. Boss Luo and Miss Maid sat down slowly at this time. Miss Maria swallowed her saliva and began to frown again. I tell you, they will definitely think that we will mix into the food. A new round of arguments started again. Whoosh! Whoosh! The vampire girl stood at the side and blew with all her might to make the fire burn more vigorously. The part of the castle exposed from the mountain was already very magnificent, but the part deep in the mountain was even bigger. This was the old nest of the Torito clan that had been built for many years, so it wasn't as simple as it looked, especially the part deep in the mountain. Not only was there a strong enchantment set up around the castle, but there were also elite vampires in many places. After all, the deeper the castle was in the mountain, the nobler the vampires living there were. The Grand Duke of the Torito clan slept in the deepest part of the mountain. Basically, the Grand Duke of the Torito clan wouldn't wake up easily unless there was an important event or a special day. On one hand, for the Grand Duke who had a long life, waking up was too boring. On the other hand, sleeping was a good way for vampires to increase their power. When humans grew old, their body functions would gradually deteriorate, but vampires were different. The older they were, the more powerful they would be, and they never knew what aging was. A group of upper-class nobles of the Torito clan were sitting in a huge ring-shaped room deep in the castle. This place was built like the theater of an opera house. On the second floor of the stands, each stand was covered by a gray veil, and only vague figures could be seen. On the stage below, there were several attendants who served the upper-class nobles. The attendants lowered their heads and waited for the orders from the upper-class nobles on the second floor. However, the upper-class nobles didn't ask the attendants to bring out the crops, as usual. Instead, they began to chat. I heard that a few guys broke into the castle today? Are they poachers? Didn't it happen several times this month? Speaking of which, after you caught the poachers last time, you gave them special treatment. Don't you think it's not nice? Don't talk about it. I thought that woman was quite clean, but I didn't expect that she would almost vomit the first time she took a breath. I don't know how many men she had slept with. She smelled like men, and she even smelled like werewolves. It's so disgusting. Ha ha ha, that's why I said, how can the snacks outside be compared with the food produced by our farm? Didn't your seniors tell you that the snacks on the roadside are seriously unhygienic? Quiet. At this moment, a low male voice suddenly came from a veil in the center. When his voice sounded, the upper-class nobles stopped chatting with each other. They all looked at the veil in the center, and they could see two figures inside. One was sitting, and the other was standing by the side serving. The one who spoke was the male vampire who was standing, Busby. In the world of vampires, he only had the identity of an attendant, but in essence, he wasn't much worse than the upper-class nobles here. In fact, he could even suppress many of the upper-class nobles here. Even though he was just an attendant, he couldn't be looked down upon by the upper-class nobles. Besides, under normal circumstances, Busby could speak on behalf of the Lord. That was the other figure who was sitting behind the veil at this time. As a direct descendant of the Toreador clan, he had the power second only to the Grand Duke in the entire Toreador clan. When the Grand Duke was asleep, he could represent the Grand Duke in the clan. He was worthy of being the prince of the Toreador clan. His name was Balegan. Balegan didn't speak at this time. After the upper-class nobles quieted down, Busby walked out from behind the veil. His attire was similar to that of the patrol soldiers, but he was wearing a full set of dark blue military uniforms. At this moment, Busby's hands were folded behind his back as he stood straight. He had pale skin and emerald-green eyes. Even though he was wearing a military uniform and gave off a murderous aura, he had an unimaginable beauty. Even in the Toreador clan, which was famous for its beauty, Busby had a godly appearance that could easily enter the top 5. Among the upper-class nobles, many female vampires' eyes became blurred at this time. Before we start eating, I want to announce a few orders from His Highness Balegan. Busby held a document in his hand, and his low and magnetic voice slowly permeated every inch of the place. First, starting from next month, all the upper-class nobles in the clan will be reduced to 85% of the original supply. The middle-class noble supply will be reduced to 70% of the original supply. The lower-class noble supply will be reduced to 50% of the original supply. The rest of the supply will remain unchanged. What? Reduced by 15%? After all, not all the female upper-class nobles would be obsessed with Busby's beauty. A slightly shrill female vampire's voice sounded very ear-piercing. Busby was expressionless and said indifferently, "Now, not only Toreador, but the other 12 clans will also reduce the supply starting from next month. As for the reason, I believe you already know more or less. Is it the sacred blood ceremony?" An upper-class noble's voice sounded, "But even for the sacred blood ceremony, there is no precedent of reducing the supply in the past, right?" Busby said, "Indeed, according to the previous harvest, there is no need to reduce the noble's supply. But for this year's harvest, we can only choose to save. Don't tell me you don't know that all the farms in the 13 clans have experienced different degrees of reduction in production? Infection, has it become so serious?" A low voice exclaimed in surprise. Busby didn't explain further. The clans had a very strict hierarchical structure. Even if there were occasional voices of opposition, they couldn't go against the tradition of power passed down for countless years. This is the decision of the 13 clans' highest council last month. Busby looked around at this moment, therefore it can't be changed. Now I will announce the second thing. That is, from today onwards, all the clansmen with titles will be recalled. Recall all the clansmen with titles? Is this also a decision of the highest council of the 13 clans? A cacophony of voices sounded at once. Silence. Busby's voice sounded again in the hall. The recall targets include the clansmen living in the modern world. The cost of their stay in the inhuman domain will be paid by the clans. Why is it being recalled? Could it be that the war with the werewolves is about to start again? But Busby said, 3 months ago, a vampire family living in the Far East was wiped out by an unknown enemy overnight. Far East? Could it be the Takizawa family? Like a thunderclap in spring, the voices in the hall suddenly became louder. Genius memorized this site's address in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1329. In the huge ring-shaped room, the sound of discussion never stopped. Obviously, the upper nobles of Toreador were quite familiar with the vampire family in the Far East. After such a long time, these long-lived species could remember a lot of things, but of course they could also forget a lot of things. Is it called Takizawa? Isn't it called Ozawa? I only remember that they are very inferior beasts, like mutated lampreys. I remember that they were transformed from some experiment or something. You guys, have you ever befriended them? I have no interest in this kind of inferior species. Baboki should know, right? Hasn't this guy always been indecent, has mistresses all over the world, and is known as the lascivious dragon among vampires? Actually, I don't remember if I've ever slept with one. I think there was one called Lola or a Loli. The upper-class aristocrat whose name was mentioned was now in deep thought. Judging from the huge figure behind the veil, his body must be plump. Among the vampires who were all above average in terms of appearance, Baboki was probably an anomaly, right? Silence. Busby's voice sounded at the right time. Many of the upper nobles stopped talking softly. In fact, they had already been given time to digest the news. Looking at the many upper nobles, Busby said expressionlessly, "After the incident, the investigation team of the 13 clans rushed over as soon as possible. After a detailed investigation, the investigation team concluded that this was a one-sided massacre, and there should only be one person who did it. It was done in one night." Only one? Their voices started to turn from surprise to surprise. Busby said indifferently, "Also, because of the bloodline of the Takizawa family, most of us have not accepted them for a long time. But I want to say that the head of the Takizawa family has evolved to the level that is close to the level of the 13 Grand Dukes, and it is very likely that he will become the 14th Grand Duke within 100 years. He has actually evolved to such a level." Astonishment had already turned into quiet exclamations. Being able to become the 14th Archduke in the next 100 years, it was probably true coming from Busby's mouth. In fact, it might even be something that all 13 archdukes had silently agreed on. The vampire community was quite wary of archdukes, and even Busby and Baligan, who stood behind him, clearly would not fabricate such a matter to gain the trust of the crowd. To be able to annihilate the Takizawa clan in a single night. Who in the world is this person? Is this a personal grudge of the Takizawa family, or a provocation against the vampires? The other party's origin and purpose are unknown. The only thing we know is that the other party is definitely not weaker than a Grand Duke, and the Takizawa family only has one survivor so far. He was sent to the inhuman domain to learn farm management when his family was in trouble, said Busby slowly. That's why he managed to escape the calamity. After he learned that his family was annihilated, he immediately went to the Supreme Council and cried, begging us to find the murderer, and the Supreme Council has already agreed to this Takizawa family survivor's request. In fact, we don't have to make such a big fuss over this family that evolved into a vampire monster. Someone shook his head at this moment. However, Busby said, the Supreme Council has issued an order. Everyone, please inform your descendants or immediate family members to return to the castle as soon as possible. As for the next action, we will inform you later. Now we can begin to feast. The Takizawa family was annihilated overnight? That was too far away. That vampire monster family was not even recognized by the mainstream of the 13 archdukes at all. The existence that would become the 14th archduke in the next 100 years? But he was already dead, wasn't he? A genius who was already dead was naturally not a genius anymore. Compared to this kind of nervousness, the upper-class nobles were more concerned about the upcoming feast. Looking at this scene, their mood instantly turned bright, and they began to look at the stage below with shining eyes like vermin. There were even some people who couldn't wait to walk out from behind the screen. Busby didn't react at all. He just slowly retreated behind the screen and then slowly sighed. The reason why he sighed wasn't because of the decadence of the upper-class nobles of the Torito family, but because of the thing in front of him. On the huge chair, there was only a scarecrow made of straw sitting in a sitting position, and on the chest of the scarecrow, there was a note with the name Baligan written on it. At the same time, on the stage, Crop had been brought up by the servants on the stage. There were about 20 men and women, and they were all between 14 and 18 years old, young and beautiful. They didn't have any shackles on their bodies, and they were all wearing the same white robes. When they walked onto the stage and faced the ring-shaped seats of the upper class, these young men and women were all infatuated. Then, they were sent to the nobles one by the servant. A young man walked into the room and came to the door of a noblewoman. The noblewoman had an unforgettable temperament, and every frown and smile of hers was like a spring breeze. At this moment she slowly walked to the front of the young man, gently stroking his cheeks, and said softly, "Look at you, I haven't seen you for only 1 month, and you seem to have lost so much weight. Did you work too hard? Or did you secretly practice alone at night again?" "It's not like that, Mom," the young man said timidly. I just want to play your favorite song to make you happy this time." "What a good boy! Come here." The noblewoman's eyes became more and more gentle. She held the young man's hand and walked to the front of a piano. She grabbed his hand and began to gently press the black and white keys of the piano, carefully and patiently teaching the young man. She whispered and laughed along with the sound of the piano. In another room, a young girl about 16 years old came in. At this moment, the obese Mr. Boboki had already stood up and came to the front of this young girl. "Doni, my baby, do you miss me?" The young girl's face blushed, and her delicate face was mixed with shyness. She softly performed the palace etiquette. "Doni greets father. Come, I've prepared a lot of beautiful clothes for you." Boboki narrowed his eyes and smiled. "They're all your favorite clothes. Come on, my little baby, be my most beautiful model." "Yes, father." The young girl slowly walked to the wardrobe, took off her clothes under Boboki's gaze, and began to slowly put on a pair of thin white stockings. Her movements were slow, as if she wanted to let Boboki see every movement clearly. And Boboki, at this moment, was holding a camera, walking in front of the young girl. The sound of the shutter was heard. That's good, that's good. Doni is so obedient. Remember to be obedient in the future, then I'll prepare more beautiful clothes for you." Click, 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 shutter and flash. At this moment, the young boy panted and fell to the ground, exhausted. He put down the wooden sword in his hand. At this moment, a nobleman came to the young boy with a bottle of water. "You've made good progress this time. Continue after 10 minutes of rest." "Okay, brother. I'll continue to work hard." "Work hard today, Kane, it's great. It could be mother and daughter, father and son, brother, sister, lover, friend, teacher and student, or even master and servant. Each room was like a different world. It only belonged to the upper-class nobles and this group of young boys and girls. The time of eating would last for a whole day. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. A servant sent a young girl into Busby's room. He was not a noble, but his identity was special, so he had the same privilege of eating as the upper-class nobles. "Well, Sir Busby, I'll leave first." After sending the girl into the room, the servant slowly retreated. At this moment, the girl suddenly threw herself into Busby's arms, and at this moment Busby, who had always been cold, had a gentle smile on his face. He hugged the girl and stood like this. Both of them seemed to be enjoying this moment of hugging each other. "Brother, you didn't cut your hair properly again. If you do this again, Mina will be angry." The girl let go of Busby and puffed up her cheeks, looking angry. "It's not very long." Busby just rubbed the bangs on his forehead, then patted the girl's head and said softly, "You've been waiting for a long time, you must be hungry. Come, I've prepared something for you to eat." The girl, Mina, immediately walked to the place where the food was placed happily. "Wow, it's all Mina's favorite food. And cake." The dormitory master said Mina can't eat too many sweet things. He said Mina has gained weight recently. "Just say I let you eat it." Busby slowly walked behind the girl, a trace of pain flashed in his eyes. "Then I won't be polite." The girl stuffed the cake into her mouth at once. "Slow down." He would always carefully wipe the cream and cake crumbs on the girl's face, and then he would patiently listen to the girl's words, since the last time they met, the things that happened to the girl in the farm. It's true. Those guys are so bad, they even pretended to be ghosts in the bathroom in the middle of the night to scare us. But then they were caught by the dormitory master, and they were punished by not eating the next day, hee hee. Mina hates learning to dance the most. She didn't pass this month's exam again. So miserable. Oh right. The sweet potatoes in the yard grew again, but only I went to roast them secretly. If only you were still in the farm, we could roast them together. Mina. Suddenly, she interrupted. Busby's voice was slightly low, as if he was facing those upper nobles. Mina's hand trembled slightly, then she lowered her head, and didn't eat the food on the table. Busby slowly sighed. We agreed that we can't mention the past. I'm sorry I accidentally. The girl was so upset that she was about to cry. The room fell into silence for a while. They didn't speak anymore. She didn't know when it started, but a slight moan of pleasure mixed with pain came from somewhere else. Only then did the girl raise her head. Time flies. The girl had a forced smile on her face. It's almost time, brother. I'm not hungry. Busby slowly turned his face away. Mina reached out and began to unbutton the collar of her robe, pulling it down, revealing the skin of her neck and shoulder. She looked at Busby and said softly, Brother, you can't do that. The dormitory master will check and monitor. Children who don't perform offering will be regarded as hated. Then, Mina won't be able to see brother next time. Busby slightly opened his mouth. The moment the snow-white skin of the girl's neck appeared, he instinctively revealed his blood-sucking fangs, but he seemed to be trying hard to restrain the growth of his fangs. At this time, the girl threw herself into Busby's arms again. Don't restrain yourself, for the next time we meet. I'm sorry. Busby lowered his head. The fangs had directly pierced into the girl's neck. The tingling feeling made the girl raise her head immediately. Then, like the other teenagers in the other rooms, her throat made a complicated moan. At this time, she gently held Busby's head with both hands, whispering, That's good. That's good. Busby's fangs went deeper, and his hands even grasped the girl's smooth back, making the robe tightly wrinkled. That's good. After crossing the grassy hillside, they could see a group of buildings covering about half a kilometer. Schools, hospitals, amusement parks, basically all the supporting facilities of the city were well planned. When walking down the hillside, Miss Maid brushed her hair that was messed up by the wind. It seems that we've arrived, farm. This is the farm. Lucio looked around. Although he didn't go deep, he could feel the life here. Obviously, it wasn't that hard, but most of the people living here were boys and girls, even children. There were not many adults. I can guess what kind of management mode it is, Miss Maid smiled. Well, probably. Boss Luo nodded, and then walked in a random direction, like the way where a branch stood before a fork in the road. Before completely entering this small town, they met a kid with glasses under a big tree by the roadside. He was about 10 years old. The kid was sitting alone under the tree, looking at the tree, and not far away, a group of kids of the same age were playing casually. Lucio curiously walked behind the kid, glanced at the book the kid was reading, and then blinked. Well, vibration and wave optics? Genius remembered this site's address in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website, Chapter 1330. He felt a sense of familiarity when he saw this physics textbook. The child looked about 10 years old, but he was wearing an unusually large white gown. The sleeves were hanging down. His hair almost reached his eyes, and he wore thick presbyopia glasses. He seemed to be dressed up for a special character. In fact, the children playing not far away could always find a variety of unique dressing up, even the older boys and girls in the town, who were 16 or 17 years old. It was as if he had walked into some kind of magical carnival. Although Boss Luo and Miss Maid stood beside him and didn't deliberately reduce their presence, the reading child was indifferent. He just carefully flipped through the physics book page by page. However, Boss Luo had always been very patient, so he just casually observed. Finally, the child and the book monk began to mutter to themselves. Although their voices were soft, they seemed to be reciting the contents of the book. From time to time, exclamations such as "I see," and "if that's the case, then I understand" could be heard. He even stopped reciting and began to close his eyes, probably to quickly recall the contents of the book again. "Who are you? Why have I never seen you before?" Suddenly, the child raised his head and looked at the two people who had been standing beside him for some time. Luocchio smiled and said, "Do you know everyone here?" "Of course." The child nodded. "There are 37 people in the kindergarten, 249 in the primary school, 167 in the middle school, 29 housemasters, 17 chefs, and I believe you can recognize all of them," Boss Luo said with a playful smile. "I'm from outside, not from this town." "Outside?" The little boy frowned and then nodded. "You came back from the outside, right? Are you the new dormitory supervisor or someone else?" Luocchio asked curiously. "Except for these, are there any other outsiders?" The little boy said subconsciously, "The infected will escape here. The infected are very dangerous. You don't look like it." "What's the infected?" Luocchio asked. The little boy said vigilantly, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" Boss Luo said slyly, "We just came from the castle." "Castle?" The little boy suddenly became absent-minded, and then his whole body became nervous. He suddenly stood up stiffly, and his words also became nervous. It's the feeder, sir. Hello. I'm baby Harry number 7211823. The growth period is 9 years, 7 months, and 19 days. My IQ is 137, my physical strength is 23.5, and my height. There was no fear instead, there was a strange and nervous self-introduction like the company interview, from the child who called himself Harry. From his so-called number to his various detailed data, even his interests and hobbies, until baby Harry finally stopped talking and then looked at Boss Luo and Miss Maid with a hint of anxiety. But he didn't seem to see the color he expected from Luocchio and Yu Ye's faces. He began to show a disappointed expression, but it was soon restrained. "Baby Harry number 7211823 has finished the introduction. I didn't satisfy the two masters. I'm really sorry. After all, my character isn't very popular, but it doesn't matter, I'll continue to work hard and wait for the master who needs me to appear." Luocchio was silent for a while and suddenly asked, "You want a master who is satisfied with you?" Harry said with bright eyes, "Since I was born, I've been waiting for my master. This is the meaning of my existence." "You've been waiting? Isn't this a matter of course?" Little Harry was stunned, then looked at them in confusion and began to frown again. "You guys, Harry, it's time to go back." A voice that was as refreshing as a spring breeze could be heard. If Miss Maria was here, she would probably roar in her heart. Another boy with the healing ability or something like that. The young man who walked over was about 20 years old. He was wearing a pink apron and round-rimmed glasses. There was an amiable smile on his face, like a young male kindergarten teacher. "Iggy Housemaster." Little Harry hurriedly ran to this man. Housemaster Iggy then said hesitantly, "They seem to be, Harry, you can't be rude to the masters. Hurry up and salute." Housemaster Iggy rubbed Harry's messy hair at this time, then looked at Boss Luo and Miss Maid. "Harry is still a baby and hasn't reached the age of selection. So it's really a master." Listening to Housemaster Iggy's words, little Harry's gaze changed again. He became annoyed again, then under Housemaster Iggy's gaze, he obediently said some words of apology. "Go, take them back to the dormitory. I still have something to talk to the two masters," Housemaster Iggy said softly at this time. Until little Harry led a group of children not far away, lined up in 2 rows and then walked back to the town in an orderly manner. The young Housemaster Iggy looked at Luocchio and smiled. This child has always been the one who keeps the most records and studies the most seriously. Although he's still a baby, he has actually completed the advanced courses of primary and secondary school. Although this is his character setting, he still works hard. He's really serious, waiting for his master to appear. Boss Luo said, I heard from him that this kind of character setting isn't very popular. Housemaster Aigi smiled casually. There will always be a time when there's a need. God knows what the upper and middle-class nobles of the castle are thinking. Maybe there will suddenly be someone who likes them? Will that include you? Luoqiu asked casually. Me? Aigi shook his head. Let's not talk about this first. Compared to this, I'm more curious about the two of you. If I remember correctly, the castle seems to have no other guests except for the two ladies recently, right? Luoqiu said, because of some mistakes, I trespassed on your land. Then I became interested in this farm, so I want to take a look. Although I know these words are a little perfunctory. Eunuch Aig narrowed his eyes. The gentle aura of a big brother seemed to have disappeared all of a sudden and was replaced by a lurking venomous snake. But why do I feel like I'm convinced? If I think about it carefully, it's really terrifying. Luoqiu smiled and said, wouldn't it be good if the conflict could be resolved through words? I agree. Housemaster Aigi nodded, returning to the appearance of a young kindergarten teacher, and then smiled. If you want to take a look, I can be a temporary guide for you too if you don't mind. That's really the best. Luoqiu smiled. Housemaster Aigi smiled and said, in this case, can you let the lady beside you let me go a bit? Behind this extremely calm conversation, there was an abnormal danger. At this time, at Eunuch Aig's side, in the instant he released that viper-like gaze, there were 4 black flame spears that shot out from in front of him and behind him, completely sealing him off. As long as he moved a bit, he would be directly burned by the black flames. Even though he didn't really get burned, his soul trembled. Sorry. Luoqiu said apologetically, she cares more than I do. But she doesn't mean any harm. This warning is enough. Housemaster Aigi smiled bitterly. Then, the two of you, this way please. It almost softened most of the known architectural styles. Probably when it was built, the layout of the whole town had been well planned, so although there were many styles, they were surprisingly connected together naturally. According to Maria's introduction, a Torito was a clan that pursued aesthetics the most, and it was probably right. On a small stone road in the main part, Housemaster Aigi introduced these buildings of different styles one by one, just like a knowledgeable young master, although he was still dressed like a kindergarten teacher. How long can they grow? Luoqiu looked at the young boys and girls walking on the street and asked curiously. Usually, the last harvest will be carried out on the day of their 18th birthday. And the first harvest starts at the age of 12. Housemaster Aigi smiled and said, they think that the young boys and girls in this age range have the most beautiful state of human life. Whether it is the maturity of the body or the purity of the soul, they can even break or sew up their hearts at will. After the age of 18? Housemaster Aigi paused for a while and slowly said, after the last harvest, before the age of 25, the normal harvest will be carried out. According to the quality of the products, they will be supplied to the middle and lower nobles and circulated as goods for the commoners. After the age of 25, the harvest time will be extended according to the quality of the individual. Usually, even if the harvest is extended, it will be within 1 or 2 years. After that, there would be a year of recuperation period to nourish the crops. Then, they would be used for planting to produce new larvae. After this process, the value of the crops would basically be depleted. Then, there would be some follow-up processing, such as selling them to low-level nobles or civilians as low-level blood slaves and servants to be kept in captivity. Of course, in the inhuman realm, there will be some people who like to buy these products, especially some potioneers and wizards. They like to use them to experiment with medicine. What a complete industrial chain, Luochu nodded. This really suits the name of products. After all, this is a production model that has been constantly explored and modified. Housemaster Ige smiled and said, "We can't be like lunatics and eat the food on the street. Self-sufficiency is already in the interest of most of the inhuman realm. Even the Holy See has tacitly approved of this, and for these hundreds of years, everyone has been living in peace. After all, the inhuman realm is only so big. If a war breaks out, it won't be a good thing. Everyone is just carefully protecting the land that they live in." They know their fate in the future? Another group of young people walked by. When they walked by, they would greet Housemaster Ige warmly. Although they were confused by the strange men and women beside Housemaster Ige, they didn't ask anything. Some even went up and greeted Housemaster Ige politely. They don't know, and we won't let them know. At least, before the last harvest, they won't know what will happen in the future. For them, when they reach the age of 18, it means that they have to leave. It means that they have grown up and can live alone in the dangerous world outside. Dangerous. Luochu heard the key word. Housemaster Ige said casually, "It's probably describing the outside world as a world that has been severely damaged and has completely collapsed. The adult individuals need to leave to make room for the newborn individuals to grow. It's their duty. Of course, there will be people who yearn for it, but there will also be people who feel confused or scared because of it. But because of this, they will cherish the time before leaving more." Looking at those young people who had just left the school and were laughing, Housemaster Ige's eyes became softer and softer, because everyone can live happily here without worries. Miss Maid said coldly at this time, "False happiness?" Housemaster Ige turned back and said expressionlessly, "As long as everyone pretends to be real, then even if it's false, what's wrong with it? Why should we distinguish between the real and the fake so clearly?" I like this sentence. Luochu smiled faintly, then glanced at Miss Maid. Miss Maid could completely understand her master's meaning. At this moment, she stepped forward slowly, and a black card appeared in her palm, then she handed it to Housemaster Ige. Housemaster Ige reached out his hand to receive it. While he was puzzled, he heard Boss Luo said softly, "Take it as a return gift for this guide. This is a 20% discount card for you." 20% discount, what? He lowered his head and glanced at the black card in his hand. It was like a whirlpool. The more he looked at it, the deeper he felt he was trapped in it. However, his main body's consciousness was very strong, and he quickly struggled out of this vortex. However, there seemed to be more information waiting for him to read. He couldn't help frowning. However, the mysterious man and woman in front of him had disappeared. Housemaster Ige muttered at this moment. They actually appeared again. At this moment, a figure walked quickly toward Housemaster Ige. It was an extremely handsome young man in a blue military uniform, Busby. When Busby came to Housemaster Ige, a trace of dissatisfaction could be seen from his face, then he said coldly, "Balegan, can I say that the substitute you used this time is not sincere at all? Well, I was a little pressed for time, so I just made one casually." Housemaster Ige. Balegan smiled like a spring breeze. "Sorry." Genius remembered the address of this station in a second. Mobile version reading website. Chapter 1331. Facing Balegan, who didn't care about this, Busby sighed softly. "If there is a curious guy among these upper-class nobles, I think that thin veil can't stop the noble's eyes." Balegan smiled and said, "I want to see them do something so that the days won't be so boring." "Well, let's not talk about this. Why are you looking for me in such a hurry? Didn't you eat today?" With that, Balegan narrowed his eyes. "But I smell a sweet smell on you." Busby didn't have any reaction to this. He just said indifferently, "Today, a few outsiders broke into the territory. The patrol team chased them all the way, and finally, their carriage fell off the cliff outside the castle. They didn't find the corpses. There's reason to believe that they have sneaked into the castle." You mean today? Balegan was deep in thought at this time. No one knew what he was thinking. It's rare to see this guy thinking seriously. Busby frowned. There are 3 people, 1 male and 2 females. One of the females should be a magician who is good at using magic prop. The other 2 are unknown. Balegan suddenly said, maybe it's just a few small thieves. There's no need to make a big fuss. Withdraw the patrolling soldiers in the castle. Don't destroy the order in the castle. Let the people from the Shadow Department investigate the castle thoroughly. In addition, if you really find the other party and the other party is relatively polite, talk as the first method. I hope to resolve this matter peacefully. Balegan? Busby was puzzled. The people who broke into the territory weren't wandering around the periphery of the necktie. It was very likely that they were already in the clan's nest. Just do as I say. Balegan just shook his head. If the Shadow Department can solve it, then it can naturally solve it. If not, it's futile to dispatch more people. Of course, I hope the Shadow Department can solve it. The intruders are not them. Did something happen? Busby asked subconsciously. Balegan began to take off the kindergarten teacher's clothes. At this time, in the dark alley of the street, a black shadow suddenly flashed out. It was dressed in black, even with a dark mask on its face. It couldn't be seen whether it was a man or a woman. It didn't even say a word. It just knelt on one knee in front of Balegan, then raised its hands. What it held in its hands was a plate with another set of clothes stacked on it. It's just that I suddenly recalled some unpleasant memories. Balegan reached out to grab the cloak from the plate and put it on his body. Busby, come back with me. Today's game is over. In front of a bakery in town, Boss Luo successfully bought 2 sets of donuts under the astonished gaze of the employees. The boss and Miss Maid strolled on the street with the paper bag. This is one of the heroes who survived the war 100 years ago, Boss Luo said thoughtfully. He probably understood why there was an error in Miss Maria's coordinates. There was such a small incident. When Miss Maid mentioned the war 100 years ago, he asked about the list of survivors of the war out of curiosity. It was probably the interest that was accidentally revealed at that moment. This kind of involuntary divergence of thoughts that affected the present world had actually happened before. The most obvious one was when he was in South America. At that time, because he was curious about what Black Luaccio would look like, he allowed a Black Luaccio to move independently for a short period of time. Then, the world was distorted and zombies began to appear. Perhaps, it wasn't because he had a physique that often encountered such things. It was just an inadvertent thought that caused the incident to happen. He did not feel fear because of it. It was as if it was a natural process of understanding, and there was not the slightest ripple in his heart as he calmly pondered. Even if he had begun to realize that the distortion of the world caused by the emanation of unconscious thoughts would probably increase Alea's workload imperceptibly, did the previous one also experience this stage? This was the last question that Luaccio pondered after realizing the nature of his encounter with Aggie. Bailey. Miss Maid probably couldn't answer this question. She probably hadn't noticed the degree of change in fate. In other words, although it had been distorted, in the cognition of most creatures, this distortion was still reasonable. Bailey Swift T. Toridu. Miss Maid nodded. In the war that year, a total of 7 of the 13 clans participated in the war. Among the 7 clans that participated in the war, the most outstanding descendants of the clans were excluded. In the end, among the 7 clans, only Bailey of Toridu and the outstanding descendants of another clan survived. If I remember correctly, one of the spoils of war was obtained by Balegang. He put the last piece of donut into his mouth and chewed. The grease around his lips was quickly wiped by Miss Maid with a handkerchief. Boss Luo grabbed Miss Maid's hand and sucked the sweetness from her fingertip. He smiled and said, "One is a mediocre person with no talent who can surpass the limits of human beings with hard work. The other is a clan prince who became a legendary hero after the war but likes to raise crops. They are all very interesting, these survivors. I don't know who will be the next one. Survivor heroes naturally didn't know Farlier and Bailey. Master. All right, yours is clean too. Luochu smiled casually and held her hand. It's almost time to go back to the castle. I don't know if they have a result of the discussion. In fact, the debate between Zhong Luoyue and Maria did have a result. When the boss and Miss Maid, who were sitting there and listening to the debate, silently raised their heads slightly at the same time. Let's do it this way. It's meaningless to continue the discussion. Maria slapped her hand on the table. The sound startled the vampire girl, who was still squatting in front of the fireplace and trying to boil water. She immediately blew the wood ash all over her face. Her face turned gray. She should have been out for a while. Why did it take so long to boil the water? This question arose in Boss Luo's mind. So, in the perspective of his eyes, there was a backflow of time. The reality and the backflow began to stagger. The first time, the water was boiling, but the vampire girl, who didn't seem to have done this kind of work, poured the hard-boiled water onto the ground. She didn't overturn it the second time, but when she opened the kettle, she found that it had absorbed a lot of wood ashes. So, the vampire girl stole a glance at Boss and Miss Maid, who didn't seem to notice anything, and quietly poured the kettle away. The third time, there was no wood left. She went back to the room and removed some of the bed's legs. Finally, it was ready to serve the guests. But because of the heated debate between Maria and Zhong Luoyue inadvertently waved her hand and knocked the saucer to the ground. The vampire girl's eyes suddenly became hazy, and then she ran back to the room with grievance. The fourth time, Maria knocked it over. The fifth time, Boss Luo laughed naturally. Let me do it. When the vampire girl was covered in dust, she suddenly heard the soft voice of Miss Maid behind her. Elizabeth, who appeared to be in a sorry state and whose clean clothes were stained with many grayish-black spots because of her actions such as starting a fire, was startled. Miss Maid took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the ashes on her face. The vampire girl subconsciously thought. She felt that Brother Luocho's girlfriend was smiling more warmly than before. She seemed to be in a good mood. Did something good happen? Miss Maid just wiped it carefully. Then, she suddenly leaned close to the vampire girl's ear and said in a low voice, "You'll feel nostalgic, right? The first person you eat. You'll be with her for the rest of your life. You won't forget the feeling even when you die." The vampire girl suddenly froze, but Miss Maid's movements were still gentle, and there was no change. She didn't know what she should say. Since she was born, she had to sleep most of the time to maintain and restrain her instincts. She had too little time to learn, and her grandfather obviously didn't have the energy to teach her all kinds of things other than knowledge in the short time when she woke up. That's good. Miss Maid finally adjusted the position of Elizabeth's collar. Miss Maid smiled and didn't say anything. She just lifted the kettle that was finally ready. God knew where she got the set of tableware and tea leaves from. The vampire girl's mind was full of the meaning of Miss Maid's words. Where did the donuts come from? Seeing that there was not only tea, but also dessert for afternoon tea on the table, Maria couldn't help but be stunned. Then she picked one up and ate it without hesitation. Ever since the little healer brought Master Pansy here in the morning, until now when she was trapped in the Torito clan's castle, she really hadn't eaten anything. She didn't feel anything when they were arguing, but now that they stopped, she suddenly felt hungry. Calories and whatnot. Who wants to burn them? I'm going to eat them first. Have you two come to a conclusion? Luochu said timely. Zhong Luoyue quietly frowned, looking at the donuts on the table. After becoming a vampire, she didn't eat any human food. At first, she didn't give up and forced herself to eat all kinds of food, but in the end, she could only vomit painfully in the bathroom and then had a stomachache for half a day. Indeed, there is a conclusion. At this time, she said expressionlessly, "It's still the same as before. You two blend into the team of crops, and then leave the castle." Luocha looked at Zhong Luoyue and smiled. "It seems that Miss Zhong has convinced Miss Maria. Weren't you listening just now?" Zhong Luoyue felt a strange feeling, and then suddenly there was a strange feeling in her chest. She felt like she was being held by someone. She instantly got rid of the disgusting feeling with goosebumps all over her body, slowly sighed and then said, "Yes, although you've blended into the team of crops, you're not crops, but as transportation staff." Maria nodded at this time, licking her fingers, and said, "Yes, even if there is an inspection, generally speaking, only crops will be inspected, and not too much attention will be paid to the escorting staff. What do you think? Isn't this a good idea?" "You two have no more arguments." Luocha smiled casually and said, "That should be good. Then do as you said." "But there's still a problem," Zhong Luoyue said out of the blue. "The employees who were guarding the delivery today seemed to be all female vampires." With that, she looked at Boss Luo expressionlessly. Luocha blinked. Why do I suddenly feel that there's something in Miss Maid's eyes at this moment?" Master's female clothes. The sky was filled with white clouds, and the surroundings were dense primeval forests. For Luo Dance, it was like returning to the mountain where she used to live and the grandpa tree monster. Long Shiruo, who was holding a cigarette candy, opened her eyes like a dead fish, yawning from time to time and walking in front. The true dragon of the land of the divine lands did not leave any chance for the little butterfly to get in touch with the Inhumans. It was almost as if the true dragon of the land of the divine lands was sprinting all the way, picking all kinds of remote paths. Little Butterfly didn't have any complaints about this. But since entering this forest, Little Butterfly had a feeling of hesitation. She always felt that there was something terrible in front of her. The scenery in the primeval forest was good at first, but as they went deeper, it seemed to gradually become gloomy. The dense forest covered the sky, and the surroundings were getting darker and darker. Suddenly, a sharp face suddenly cracked on a tree trunk, and then began to laugh crazily. The surrounding trees also turned into sharp faces in an instant. The horrible laughter suddenly surrounded Long Shiruo and Luo Dance. "Wow!" Luo Dance was so scared that she suddenly grasped Long Shiruo's arm, and her body trembled slightly. Long Shiruo rolled her eyes, and only a crack was heard. The cigarette candy in her mouth was bitten off. Shinryu's biting force was no small matter, and it was so fast. But such a small one? She grabbed Luo Dance's head and clawed fiercely. "Anyway, you're also a demon. And a very fierce one. Can't you be a little bit more mature?" But at this time, a loud roar came from the depth of the forest. "Get out of here! You bunch of ugly freaks! Bitch! Ugly as hell!" In front of them, a group of women ran out crying. Each of them was probably a stunner that could make men fall head over heels for. Whether it was their appearance or figure, it was hard to find fault with them. Genius remembered this site's address in a second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1332. Seeing such a group of beauties running away in tears, Little Butterfly Monster didn't seem to be so afraid of the weird trees. However, this group of beauties didn't seem to care that there were other women in the depths of the forest. They didn't even look at them. Just like that, they bit their handkerchiefs and left while sobbing. Suddenly, a beautiful woman tripped over something and fell to the ground. Luo Dance subconsciously helped her up. The woman glanced at Luo Dance and sighed. Then she bit her handkerchief and covered her eyes with tears. She was so sad that she couldn't express it in words. "What's wrong with them, Sister Long?" Little Butterfly Monster tilted her head and looked at her sister Long confusedly. Long Shiruo just shrugged, saying indifferently, "You'll know later. But with your character, you probably won't feel anything, right?" Shaking his head, Shinryu of Kelowna was about to speak when three figures walked out from the depths of the forest. This time they were not women, but three young men. They wore the same style of clothes, like some kind of uniform. One of them was stunned when he saw Long Shirua and Little Butterfly Monster. Then he lowered his head and started flipping through a document in his hand, muttering, "Hey, why are there two more? Well, there's no corresponding information? What the hell, the logistics department is getting more and more perfunctory. Forget it, we know it won't work out." Another man waved his hand. "Hurry up, send these two in too. After all, they're already here, and their elders should have talked to them." But, as he said, he began to look at the two women, commenting, "They're young and have good figures. Isn't this a bit too much?" Shinryu of Kelowna frowned. "Yeah, she looks like she owes someone money. She's not gentle enough." The true dragon's eyebrows twitched again. "They're not feminine at all, really? Don't tell me they're here to make up the numbers." Then he raised his voice, "Hey, don't you have any other clothes? Although your figure is not good, you should at least wear good clothes to cover your shortcomings. And makeup. Do you know makeup? And your eyebrows are too hairy, and your face doesn't look rosy at all. Hey, are you listening to me or not? Show me a smile. If we can't pass, don't even think about going in. We don't care how much money your elders have spent." The true dragon of the divine land, whose brows had already calmed down, said indifferently, "Die." Then there was no then. In the depths of the dense forest, after a golden light flashed, 100-meter-long, 3-meter-wide flat road appeared. Those tree monsters that the little butterfly demon was afraid of were also gone, and the trees returned to their sunny appearance. The gloomy atmosphere in the depths of the forest was swept away, and there was peace everywhere. At this time, Kelowna of Shinryu patted the dust on his hands as if nothing had happened, and then looked at Luo Dance, and then touched his face with his fingers, saying indifferently, "Are my eyebrows hairy?" Luo Dance. The butterfly monster covered her mouth with her hands and shook her neck stiffly. But at this time, a huge roar came from the end of the flat road. In the next instant, a huge figure appeared above their heads, blocking the sunlight that was already shining down. At this moment, a huge head was hanging down from above. Long Shirua raised her head. The huge figure and her looked at each other, and after blinking their eyes, the huge figure said slowly, "Long time no see, Shinryu of the East, you haven't changed at all. Has the charm of a female really abandoned you?" "Well, you haven't changed at all, Fafnir," Long Shirua said expressionlessly. "You still make me want to smash you when you open your mouth." In an instant, a huge golden storm was set off. The wind was so strong that Butterfly Monster's body was blown up. She had to quickly grab Long Shirua's arm, but her body was still swaying in the storm like a kite. However, this golden storm left as quickly as it came. In just an instant, the golden storm had already stopped. The huge creature had already disappeared, and in its place was an extremely beautiful person who was even more beautiful than those who had run away crying. How to say, at least, Luo Dance couldn't find any other adjectives except for the word beautiful. Seductive, noble, dazzling, even the figure was elegant, as if every part of the body was the most perfect work of art. And its voice was not as rough as when it roared, but was quite magnetic. The eyes were full of expectation. Even though Luo Dance was still in the stage of ignorance about the matters between males and females, she felt her heart beating fast because of this pair of bewitching eyes. The smile of the boss suddenly appeared in her mind, and then she gradually calmed down. This was something she accidentally found during the estrus last time. As long as the boss smile appeared in her mind when her body was the hottest, she would feel a little comfortable. She didn't even tell Sister Long about it. She didn't say it subconsciously. "Sister Long, who is this beautiful sister?" Luo Dance blinked at this time, with a curious look on her face. After hearing the word beautiful, the smile on the other party's face seemed to become brighter. It was enough to charm all living beings. Kelowna Shinryu was not affected at all, and said indifferently, "Who knows, the last male golden dragon in the world will be a pervert who likes to cross-dress? And it's a moron who thinks he is the prettiest in the world after cross-dressing." This group of people from the Magic Biology Department of the Magicians Association probably never thought of this. It's really sad. Male? Yeah. The male. Golden Dragon Fafnir chuckled at this time. Shinryu of the East, it seems that not only the god of charm abandoned you, but also the god of vulgarity fell in love with you. Don't worry, if such a god really likes me, I'll smash it. Long Shirua sneered, taking out a cigarette. This time it was a real one. I think so. Fafnir walked slowly, like the noblest queen in the world. She was tall enough to be half a head taller than Shinryu, who looked like a normal Eastern woman. So, why did you come to me this time? To learn etiquette or to learn how to dress up? I brought you something good. Long Shirua narrowed her eyes and smiled. Maybe it's something that can make you interested in other females. Fafnir smiled and said, even you are the same as those old guys from the Magicians Association, still not giving up? In this world, I am the only one who is as beautiful as me, and that is enough. I won't leave behind a descendant as beautiful as me. My inheritance is too perfect. Why is there such a perfect creature like me? Cough, cough. Cough, cough. What did you feed me? Fafnir looked as if he choked. Even so, even if he was frowning, he was still as beautiful as before. It was as if Shishir was holding her heart, making me feel pity for him. Okay, I've delivered the thing. Long Shirua clapped her hands at this time. Well, you can let those magicians in the biology department prepare more than 100 females for you. That was really straightforward. There wasn't any nonsense at all. The little butterfly monster looked and confirmed. Well, this is really Sister Long's style. You? What did you feed me? Fafnir couldn't help but show fear. Why do I always feel a strange odor gushing out from my body? My drug resistance is obviously. What a joke, even if I inhaled a little bit, I would. Long Shirua just yawned, then pulled Luo Dance up and directly jumped into the air. It's time to give you a biology lesson. Long Shirua looked at Luo Dance, smiling. Let's see how this so-called Western lizard copulates. Eh? Roar! A huge roar came out from this beautiful person's small mouth. Her snow-white skin was gradually dyed with a layer of redness, as if she was drunk. So uncomfortable. I miss. What did you feed me? Why is it like this? My body is so strange. At this time, Fafnir was leaning on the trunk, slightly panting. Her eyes were misty and the rippling aura all over her body seemed to have infected the flowers and trees, looking extraordinarily vigorous. But she had been resisting the effect of the butterfly powder. Long Shirua rubbed her chin, tooting. She's really tenacious, swallowing such a big one and she can still bear it. Tut tut. Sister Long, is she really okay? Why do I feel that she's suffering? Don't worry, she's just in heat. Long Shirua said casually. Let's care about the female who will copulate later, whether she can bear it or not. Well, there's probably no problem. Don't know how many inhuman. Here hope that their offspring can give birth to the golden dragon's offspring. You saw those guys who were driven away just now. As if it had fulfilled Long Shirua's words, Fafnir at this time began to tear her clothes. 2 soft lumps of gelatin directly fell out. Tut! Fake breasts as expected. Long Shirua pouted and sneered disdainfully, then her eyes suddenly widened. She stared at Fafnir's lower body, saying in a trembling voice, Flat, flat? Damn pervert, you, where's your lower body? That kind of ugly. The only thing that affects my beauty. I've already abandoned it. Ugh, what the f*ck? Long Shirua's jaw dropped. What the f*ck? Fafnir suddenly rushed up to the sky. I can't stand it. With a sound that pierced through the sky, it had already transformed into a beam of golden light that rushed straight to the edge of the sky. Then, from its hands and mouth, it madly released one light bullet after another, directly destroying everything in its path. Sister Long? Long Shirua suddenly shivered, suddenly asking, Agile, did I really kill those 3 guys just now? Little Butterfly gave a start, subconsciously saying, No, you just sent them flying, they shouldn't be dead yet. What's wrong? Of course, I'll kill them again. Long Shirua pretended to be serious, to silence them. But that sister, Brother Fafnir? What should we do? Long Shiro muttered, Well, I didn't expect this guy to be so cruel, even castrating himself. But it's okay, he just drained his physical strength in this way. When he's almost done, he should be able to stop. With that, Kelowna's Shinryu directly pulled Luodance's arm, running away in the opposite direction of Fafnir's rampage, disappearing in a flash. In the territory of Teredo clan, in a room of the headquarters castle. There was no coyness, no stubborn resistance, and no hoarse argument, none of these. Under the incredible gaze of Zhong Luoyue and Maria, Boss Luo very obediently walked into the bedroom of the vampire girl Elizabeth. About half an hour later, he walked out again. In fact, the servant girl walked out first. Her smile became more beautiful, as if she had obtained some kind of extreme satisfaction. Then, it was the vampire girl's turn. The vampire girl's eyes seemed to be wandering, as if she couldn't focus. Then, she held her cheeks and muttered something. Sorry to keep you waiting for so long. A soft and androgynous voice slowly rang out. Within the room, a young female slowly walked out just like that. Without any coyness, she was natural and unrestrained. Her behavior could be regarded as elegant. There was a faint smile on her face. It could be vaguely seen that it was the original outline of Boss Luo's face, but under the superb transformation technology, the masculine lines were completely softened. The long wig with a neat fringe hung down naturally. She wore a black shiny backless dress. Her legs wrapped in thin black stockings were naturally closed at this time, and there was a black women's leather jacket hanging on her hand. Maria, who was drinking water, choked violently, then subconsciously looked up at Zhong Luoyue. Her small mouth was slightly open, as if she had seen a ghost. At this time, Boss Luo still didn't coyness at all, but gently turned in front of everyone, then showed a faint smile and said softly, Hello, everyone, my name is Luoer. Why do I have a sense of frustration that I want to die? Maria muttered to herself, her neck stiffly turned again, and looked at Zhong Luoyue again. This time, she just kept silent and didn't speak. Maria sighed and said, This time, we probably don't have to argue about anything. Zhong Luoyue nodded, Indeed, there's no need. Genius remembered this site's address in a second. Mobile version reading website. Chapter 1333. Don't you feel that the patrol team has disappeared? In the corridor of the castle, they were moving carefully. With the vampire girl's unique telepathic ability, they tried their best to avoid the vampires of the Teredo clan. Speaking of which, it seems to be true. Zhong Luoyue could not help but frown. She felt that things were a little strange. However, Elizabeth did not give any hint. The vampire girl did not leave the room this time. Instead, she used her telepathy to stay in the room as a guide. Of course, the little girl could also let her thoughts pass directly into everyone's hearts, if not for the special precautions against her ability. Moon, it's safe in front. You can pass. Zhong Luoyue nodded and then walked out first. She and Elizabeth were visitors in the castle. Therefore, even if they encountered special situations, they could still deal with them. As for why Elizabeth was not chosen to play this role, it was naturally because Zhong Luoyue felt that this little girl's acting was too bad. She could only bite the bullet and do it. Although the third daughter of the Zhong family was nervous, at least she did not see anything from her face. Everyone walked silently. Their first destination was the lounge of the team responsible for transporting the Wu crops today. Brother Luochio, can you hear me? Suddenly, the vampire girl's voice sounded in Boss Luo's ears. If you can, nod your head. Can you already control your telepathy? I can hear you. Boss Luo's expression was normal. He also communicated with Elizabeth through telepathy. Obviously, this conversation was similar to a private chat. I have been practicing. However, now I can only separate two telepathy. I can't do more than that. But I feel that I can separate many more. Elizabeth's voice was always so soft. This kind of telepathy was like a whisper in one's ear. Luocio asked curiously, besides telepathy and telepathy, are there any other effects? Elizabeth quickly said, I can control the movements of small animals. For ordinary people, I can also control them for a short period of time. But for those with stronger minds, I can't control them. It's already very powerful. This was the answer that Luocio came up with after some thought. Of course, the answer was not a compliment, but he had really done some research on the future development potential of this ability. He bought the research report from the altar. In theory, the limit was to be able to cover all objects with consciousness in an instant and freely control all bodies of consciousness. Of course, the premise was that her consciousness was strong enough to cover any body of consciousness. But it seemed to be limited by the limit of species evolution. This theoretical limit would not be reached if there were no accident. The potential of this telepathic ability was huge, but Elizabeth's bloodline did not improve because of it. Among the vampires, her bloodline was only above average. Really? The little girl raised her voice slightly. She seemed to be very happy with this kind of praise. Really? Brother Luocio, can I ask you something? Elizabeth's voice sounded beside Boss Luo's ear again. Ask away. Big brother Luocio, why are you willing to do such a thing? Don't men have conflicting emotions? It's okay if you don't answer. Such a thing. Luocio was stunned at first, then he reacted and said casually, Are you talking about the disguise? Just by listening to the soft hum, it was as if he could imagine the vampire girl's appearance at this time. Is it because of this kind of interest? Boss Luo smiled and said, I'm not interested in this kind of interest. But, aren't you guys quite happy? Happy? The little girl was stunned. Luocio smiled and said, As long as you don't see this disguise as something shameful, but as something that can make people happy, it's fine. Just like clowns, don't they always make people smile because they are funny and absurd? That's why how do we go on the road ahead? She seems to be a little anxious. Luocio reminded softly. Zhong Luoyue, who was walking in front, began to look a little nervous because she couldn't get why Elizabeth's instructions. The vampire girl still couldn't do two things at once. At this time, she didn't dare to continue to be absent-minded. Instead, she focused on guiding Zhong Luoyue's next route. Then, like an expedition team, they carefully moved forward bit by bit in the dangerous castle. This kind of experience was quite interesting. Behind them, Luor and Miss Maid followed casually. In human territory, neutral chaotic area 3. Even though the non-humans had their own territories in the inhuman territory, there were also habitats where different species could unite, such as the neutral chaotic area. At the same time, its existence prevented the non-humans' territories from directly contacting each other. Basically, in this kind of distribution center, one could see a lot of life in a Western fantasy. In the lively market there were all kinds of shouting voices. But suddenly, a frightened scream sounded. At first, no one paid attention to it. However, the terrified voices gradually grew louder and louder like waves coming from afar. Very soon, it had already formed an abnormally huge momentum. All of a sudden, there was chaos in the market, and then there was a loud noise. In the sky, for some unknown reason, many light bombs with terrifying destructive power suddenly fell from the sky. As if fighter jets were bombing, the huge market was soon bombed into tatters. Many non-humans were directly blown up or injured to the ground. It seemed like an unexpected disaster. When they woke up, the destruction seemed to be far away, but 1/3 of the neutral chaotic area had been severely damaged. This aura seems to be F***CK. It's the evil dragon Fafnir. Did it take the wrong medicine? The people of the Magician Association don't care about it? This direction seems to lead to the werewolf territory? I don't know. I don't care. I want to go to the Magician Association and ask for an explanation. If they don't compensate me for my loss, I don't mind letting those guys have a taste of what an artistic explosion is. Is there anyone who wants to go with me? Count me in. Me too. Let's go, let's go. And so, the non-humans of 3 in the neutral chaotic area began to gather and march towards the headquarters of the Magician Association. However, as the group moved forward, they unknowingly began to expand from victims from other places. At the same time, Kelowna Shinryu, who felt that it was about time to stop, suddenly shivered and muttered, "It should be almost done venting, right?" In fact, Kelowna Shinryu didn't know how long the butterfly powder effect of such a large ball could last. She just thought that the Golden Dragon's resistance to drugs was not bad, and it had a strange personality, so she wanted to use a strong drug to treat it. Anyway, if Fafnir could really leave behind offspring, those guys in the Magician Association would probably have the mentality that the more the better, and wouldn't care at all how many females it mated with. But now, would Kelowna's limb rebirth work on that thing? Sister Long, where are we going now? Luo Dance asked at this time. Long Shirua pondered for a while and said, "Since we're here, let's pick some golden apples on the way. Last time, its root accidentally. Well, it should have grown out again." Root? What root? So far, the number of people that the little butterfly talked to in the inhuman domain was less than 5. "Let's go, if we're lucky, I'll get you something to eat. It's good for you." Long Shirua pulled up the little butterfly and started a new round of sky dash. Inside the castle of Teredo clan, Bailey, who went out, had come back quietly without disturbing any upper-class nobles. In fact, the upper-class nobles who had just finished eating were actually in the aftertaste of eating, so they didn't deliberately pay attention to anything. "I've ordered the patrolling soldiers to continue patrolling in the territory." Busby came to Bailey's side and reported. Baligan didn't seem to care about this. He just sat in his seat and played with a black card in his hand. He kept silent. "What's this?" Busby couldn't help frowning. Bailey slowly raised his head at this time. At this moment, Busby had a feeling of standing in front of death. He even instinctively became alert. Bailey's eyes, at this moment, were like a demon coming out of hell. That trace of killing intent and madness had never been seen before. But this feeling came and disappeared very quickly. In the blink of an eye, Bailey returned to his gentle state and slowly said, "If I say, this is a proof that can lead to a passage that can fulfill any wish, would you believe it, Busby?" "Anything?" Busby frowned. He clearly didn't agree with this kind of absolute statement. The black card quickly flipped between Bailey's fingers and then disappeared. He chuckled and said, "Of course, any wish has a price, a sufficient price. Give up and get, the principle of equivalent exchange?" Busby nodded. "If so, there will be a limit to what an individual can give, and there will naturally be a limit to what they can get. Anything is just misleading." "Mislead?" Baligan smiled. "Maybe. But Busby, you seem to have forgotten one thing. That is, although there will be a limit to what an individual can give, if they learn to plunder, it may not be the limit." "You are very strange today," Busby said expressionlessly. "It seems that something has happened to you." Baligan smiled with a complicated expression, then waved his hand. After this action, Busby bowed and slowly retreated. But before Busby was about to leave, Bailey suddenly said, "By the way, eating is over. Don't you want to see your sister? The next time we meet will be at least a month later. You will at least stand at Sita's side and watch her leave, right?" Outside the door, Busby's pupils suddenly shrank. His figure also stiffened for a moment, but he quickly recovered and whispered, "There's no need. I'm a vampire now. Then I'll take my leave." After Busby left, the surroundings of Bailey Hill dimmed. He was still sitting on the huge throne, and next to the throne was the scarecrow substitute he made temporarily. The black card that had disappeared from between his fingers appeared once again, and then slowly turned over with the shaking of his fingers. He murmured, "It seems that Farrell is really not crazy." Suddenly, Balegan opened his palm. In the dim surroundings, several messengers flew into his palm. The messengers stayed for a moment, then flew out of Balegan's palm again and disappeared. Teredo Clan, headquarters castle, superstructure, somewhere near the edge of the exposed area of the castle. Well, the resting place of today's transport team is in front. So far, everything is going well. Finally, they arrived at the destination, and the next step was to blend into the escort team. Maria didn't need to worry about these things anymore, and she patted her chest and took care of it. At this time, she directly put her hand into her collar, then took out a bottle like a perfume bottle, looking at Luocio and Yu Yi. "Please spray this on yourself. Master Heptil should know what this is, right?" She opened the bottle a little. "Blood freshener?" Miss Maid directly said a name. "Master Heptil is indeed worthy." Maria nodded with a smile. Vampires are very sensitive to the smell of humans. Although the blood freshener allows us to simulate the scent of a vampire, it can at least cover up the scent of a human. As for pretending to have just finished eating, for such low-level vampires with poor transportation skills, we should be able to fool them. Miss Maid said indifferently, "It's not necessary, please put it away, Miss Maria. Headgear." "Headgear?" Jean Luoyue was stunned and subconsciously looked at Maria. But this guy was wearing a headgear from the beginning, which was quite appropriate, wasn't it? Thus, she couldn't help but sneer. "Where's Miss Balaclava? Do you think it's easy for me to earn some bounty?" In the headgear, Maria couldn't help but burst into tears. Genius remembered this site's address in a second. Mobile version reading website. Chapter 1334. Although it was just a resting area for the escorts, there were all kinds of facilities, such as massage chairs, food area, entertainment room, etc., because the upper-class nobles took a long time to eat. In any case, Maria had applied a lot of blood freshener on herself. However, she seemed to have subconsciously forgotten one thing. No matter how good the plan was, she was still wearing a mask. It was very difficult for her to not attract attention in this way. Fortunately, the escort team also seemed to have an exclusive uniform, a white uniform with a hat. They wore the hat and lowered their heads slightly. "Try your best." Obviously, Master Pansy didn't want her to take off her hood. Did all the people who asked her to make medicine meet such deceptive requests? "Well, wait here, Mademoiselle Maria." "Luocio." Luoer smiled at this moment. "It just so happens that Elisabeth told me that there are 3 escorts here. Just knock them out temporarily." Maria quickly nodded. "Well, we just want to leave. There's no need to hurt the vampires of the Teredo clan. We should try not to escalate the conflict." "Then leave it to us." Boss Luo nodded, and then walked slowly toward the chosen place with Miss Maid. As for Jean Luoyue, he was far away from here, but still able to monitor the situation and provide support. Even with Elisabeth's immediate senses, she was undoubtedly the most nervous one here. This time, Elisabeth chose a lounge in the resting area that was equipped with a massage chair. The 3 female vampires who were transporting the vampires would rest here after taking a bath. Speaking of which, it seems that this is the first time I've done this kind of thing, Luocio said excitedly. But he didn't know how long this temporary interest would last. Perhaps he would soon lose interest in life. But at the very least, he had even removed the reduction of his presence. Since he was sneaking in like this, there was still a chance that he would be exposed. Only then would it seem more realistic. Miss Maid blinked her eyes. "Next, I may experience many different things. For example, like now, so please bear with me." When Luocio said this, his fingers were entwined with Miss Maid's fingers like glue. "Experience?" Boss Luo didn't say anything, but the string of prayer beads in his hand glowed slightly. Then, they arrived at their destination. He looked at Miss Maid and said, "You and I don't know what's going on inside. In that case, will there be any expectations for what will happen next?" Miss Maid's perception of the surroundings was blocked by Boss Luo, as if it was a prank. He hugged Miss Maid's waist from behind and whispered in her ear, "Once you get used to having everything under control, the control suddenly disappears. But from now on, there's only a dense fog in front of you. You don't know what's in front of you. It might be something beyond your expectations." The edge of her lips and ears seemed to touch. Miss Maid narrowed her eyes and whispered, "Master seems to be getting worse." "Is that so?" Luocchio's smile became bigger, "But I'm the same as you. Now we don't know what's waiting inside. Tell me, how do you feel when your perception disappears?" Miss Maid whispered, "There's a moment of confusion. It's hard to describe that feeling. Maybe I'm not used to it, but it's not to the extent of fear. There should be a little bit of nervousness, but it's fine now." She smiled. "It's not bad to experience this feeling occasionally. I haven't had such an experience for a long time." "Isn't that good?" Luocchio smiled slightly, but his eyes became more indifferent. He didn't have the experience that Miss Maid said, so he couldn't experience it. "Master, do you like this feeling?" Yu Yi asked softly. "Me?" Luocchio said softly, "As you said, it's not bad to experience it occasionally. What kind of feeling was it?" "Then you can experience it more in the future." Miss Maid answered obediently. Luocchio didn't say anything, but gently put down his hand from Miss Maid's abdomen and said casually, "Then, let's start our work. Let me have a try this time, then you support me." Miss Maid naturally stepped back. Boss Luo opened the door with expectation. He didn't even think about what would happen next. Luocchio heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he slowly pushed open the door of the lounge and walked in. In an instant, he saw 3 naked female vampires entangled with each other like snakes. Isn't this the massage lounge?" The next second, Boss Luo closed the door. It seems that I made the right choice to temporarily shut off the perception of myself and Miss Maid before coming in." At this time, the 3 female vampires who were entangled with each other heard the sound of the door opening, and raised their heads at the same time. They didn't panic because they were seen doing what they were doing at this time, nor did they scream. They just looked at the person at the door strangely. In the vampire clan, most of them were born with debauchery. Originally, eating would not only bring satisfaction, but also a wonderful pleasure. Therefore, even if they were seen doing some activities with several females, they didn't feel any shame. When they saw the woman at the door clearly, they all showed a burning gaze. Not only did they have debauchery, but the Toradou clan was also a group of people who yearned for beauty. Even among the 13 clans, they were an unusual existence because they even approved of humans' artistic creation and would praise it as a great work. There was a kind of, "That's all, as long as it's beautiful." They even ignored the unfamiliar face in front of them that they had never seen before. Anyway, it was definitely not a noble from the upper class. They firmly remembered the nobles from the upper class and even the middle class. As for the escorting team, they were actually considered as lower-class nobles. This kind of excellent high-class crop that was specially provided for the upper-class nobles naturally couldn't be taken care of by lower-class vampires. "Although I haven't seen you before. But, there's still some time, don't you want to come and play with me?" At this time, a vampire directly stood up at this time and slowly walked in naked. The debauchery on her face became more and more intense. As she walked, her body also slightly shook. Not only her, but the other 2 also came at this time. There was even one who directly climbed up from the ground like a cat slowly. Luocchio blinked. At this time, when the female vampire who came first reached out her hand and wanted to lift his chin, a long, thick, and black stick was directly grasped in his hand. Then, he directly hit the female vampire's forehead head-on, a prop from Maria's magic house, a sleeping stick. What a big stick! The female vampire who was hit by the big stick instantly became absent-minded, and then her body softly fell onto Luo-Er's body. At this time, the other two female vampires were also hit by Luo-Er's stick one after another. Actually, it was just a light hit. Just like the reaction of the previous vampires, their bodies softly fell down. Luochu lowered his head and looked at the three female vampires who fell down at his feet. After thinking for a while, he waved his hand and sent them back to the massage chair. Then, he covered each of them with a blanket. All in all, it's a good experience, right? Thinking of this, Boss Luo opened the door of the lounge again, and then made an okay gesture to Miss Maid, smiled and said, "Seems like it's not that difficult." Miss Maid looked into the room. She found it strange that the three female vampires were killed while they were still lying on the massage chair. What happened just now? This feeling of being blocked in the beginning brought a long-awaited experience, but now it seemed a little uncomfortable. "Next, let Miss Maria come over," Luochu said suddenly. "Okay." Miss Maid nodded. Inhuman territory, werewolf territory. Strictly speaking, werewolves were not a branch of orcs in the inhuman territory. There were many versions of the origin of werewolves, and among the werewolves, because of the different versions of origin, there were many tribes. Of course, there were some tribes that had the same origin legend as the orcs. However, werewolves usually didn't call themselves orcs. They were proud warriors. Today, the werewolf territory was as peaceful as usual. The war between the werewolves and vampires was like a fated enemy, but in fact, it had stopped for a long time. In the inhuman territory, wars between inhuman races were forbidden. Of course, in the modern world, there were still conflicts between the two factions, and they would greet each other by hammering each other's heads. At the same time, on one of the hills in the werewolf territory, the Kaloya village, which believed in the same origin as the orcs and was close to the orcs, Hoggins, the young master of the Kaloya village, was lying on a beach chair and basking in the new artificial sun that the Magician Association had created this year. Two young girls from the Wolf clan were applying antibacterial ointment and massaging him. At this moment, a small, round, demon-shaped messenger slowly flew over and stopped on young Master Hoggins's body. Hoggins was too lazy to move, and he just ordered the werewolf girl beside him to open the messenger. "Is it a promotion for the Magician Association? What new products do they have this time?" Hoggins yawned and asked. "No, it's signed by Caesar," the werewolf girl said with a crisp voice. "Caesar." Hoggins got up and took the letter from the werewolf girl's hand, reading it with a frown. After reading the letter, Hoggins pondered for a while. "This guy said that he has something important to discuss with me, and he wants me to go back to the modern world. What is it?" Caesar rarely speaks in such a serious tone. "Young master, is this Caesar the only new orc that can defeat you?" The other werewolf girl covered her mouth and chuckled. "We are evenly matched. He beat me 97 times, lost to me 96 times, and tied me 5 times. Do you understand?" Hoggins corrected her. The two werewolf girls chuckled to themselves. Hag shook his head and hugged the two girls in his arms. After messing around with them for a while, he got up. "Caesar won't look for me unless it's something important. It seems that I really have to go to the modern world. Get dressed. I'm going to see my father and tell him about this." Everyone in the werewolf territory knew that young Master Hoggins of the Kaloya tribe was a man of action, and he would do whatever he wanted to do. As his personal servants, the girls weren't surprised. However, they still felt a little nervous when they saw the current leader of the Kaloya tribe. The leader's name was Kaloya, and this tribe's name wasn't Kaloya in the past. The name change happened 100 years ago. This was because the current leader was the hero of a horrifying war 100 years ago. The tribe changed its name to commemorate Kaloya's greatness. When young Master Hoggins, who was dressed neatly, walked quickly to the house where Kaloya lived in seclusion, this werewolf warrior whose name had spread across the entire orc territory was sitting in the courtyard with a letter in his hand, reading it silently. "Old man," Huggins froze for a second. He had never seen such a serious expression on his father's face. There was even a vague feeling of fear on his father's face. What could make the hero of the war 100 years ago feel scared? Huggins opened his mouth slightly. In his opinion, it was hard to find anything that could defeat his father except for time. At this moment, he realized that Kaloya's condition seemed to be a little worse than the last time he saw him. His old age was getting clearer. Werewolves and vampires had been enemies for generations, but unlike vampires, who had a long lifespan, werewolves could only live for 200 to 300 years. Kaloya was now 279 years old, which was a rare old age among the werewolves. Just like humans who had passed 70 years old, although he still looked healthy, he was obviously unable to maintain the peak combat power he had when he was young. "Is it Huggins?" As if noticing Huggins' arrival, Kaloya put away the letter in his hand and said with a smile, "It's a message from an old friend, saying that his time is almost up." "I see. Death?" He would always encounter it. At his father's age, the friends he knew back then would gradually leave. Is it because he is about to lose an old friend that he feels scared? Sure enough, except for time, there was nothing that could make Hero Kaloya feel scared. "Father." Huggins put away the doubts in his heart, strode forward, and said directly, "I plan to go to the modern world. Caesar said that he has something to discuss with me personally." "Caesar," Kaloya muttered, "that hard-working little guy. It's a pity. If it weren't for the ideals in his heart, he could have become stronger. He's really wasted too much time on meaningless things." "Then what about me?" "You go." Kaloya waved his hand. "I also plan to go out and meet this old friend. How about I accompany you first and then go to the modern world?" Considering that this might be the last time they met, and there might even be a funeral in the end, Huggins suggested carefully. "No need, I can go by myself." Kaloya shook his head. When he was about to say something, his eyes instantly became sharp. At this moment, the air was trembling slightly. Moreover, a loud roar instantly reverberated throughout Kuraloya's stronghold. In the distance, a huge figure was approaching rapidly. Genius remembered the address of this site in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1335. The light bombs landed on the hillside, and large areas of cultivated farmland were destroyed. At this moment, the people who were farming in Kaloya village all hid from this sudden destruction in fear. A few figures rushed over. They were the guards of Kaloya village. "Hurry! Organize rescue and evacuate as soon as possible. Also, put out the fire." However, the children's cries and screams quickly drowned out the voices of these guards. Fortunately, the people who lived here were all strong werewolves and a small number of orcs. When the disaster came, they still had the ability to save themselves. However, the village was in a mess. Not far away, a figure jumped down from a hill. It was young Master Hags. After he landed, 2 werewolf girls arrived at the same time. Looking up at the huge creature that was wreaking havoc in the sky and bringing disaster to his village, Hags was terrified. Dragon aura. The horrifying aura of the top of the food chain squeezed the wolf-like nature in his body to the extreme. "This is the evil dragon Fafnir?" Hags murmured to himself. Anyone who had stayed in the inhuman domain for a while would know that the last golden dragon, Fafnir, was in the inhuman domain. However, there were not many people who could come into contact with Fafnir personally. Fafnir had his own territory, and there were many people from the Biological Management Department of the Magician Association outside the territory. They were responsible for maintaining the cleanliness of the territory. Hags had sensed Fafnir's aura from afar, but he had never come face to face with Fafnir like this. At this moment, he felt as if all the hair on his body had become stiff. "It's an evil dragon." Hag's eyes flashed, and his body trembled slightly. He didn't know if it was because of fear or excitement. Even Caesar hasn't faced an evil dragon directly, right? Taking a deep breath, this young master of Kaloya, suddenly let out a long roar, his voice penetrating the entire Kaloya tribe, descendant of the legendary evil dragon. "Let me fight you!" With a hint of fear and a strong will to fight, Hags charged like a rocket toward the huge object in the sky. But what this young master didn't expect was that when his momentum was only halfway there, he was directly suppressed by something. Hags only felt a huge force directly smashing him to the ground. And the one who had made a move was his father, the hero of the Great War 100 years ago, Kiraloya. "Old man!" Hags couldn't help but roar furiously. "Behave yourself!" Kiraloya's voice was filled with majesty. The moment his voice fell, Kiraloya also climbed onto the body of this huge creature. He stood on the back of Fafnir, who had revealed his true form, and then frowned. Just from this instant of contact, Kiraloya could already sense that Fafnir was currently in an abnormal berserk state. He glanced at the village below, and his voice instantly turned cold. "Aren't you doing well in your nest? Why did you come to my place to behave atrociously?" But the only response to this werewolf hero was an even more violent dragon roar. After feeling that someone was riding on his back, Fafnir's frenzy seemed to have increased by several levels in an instant. Even Kiraloya couldn't stand stably just by standing there. "Stop! I told you to stop!" Kiraloya snorted coldly. "If you don't stop, don't blame me for attacking you regardless of the friendship between me and your father." "Roar!" Kiraloya gritted his teeth. "Old Fafnir, don't blame me in hell. It's your descendant who behaved atrociously in my territory first." Taking a deep breath, his chest suddenly swelled up, and this somewhat aged valor of the werewolf clan instantly expanded into a huge and strong body and punched towards Fafnir's junior. But as a golden dragon, the adult Fafnir's strong defense was obviously not broken because of this. Kiraloya only heard that after this punch, Fafnir seemed to make some strange sounds. Vaguely, it seemed to be a joyful sound? But before Kiraloya could think about it, Fafnir began to spin at high speed in the sky, as if trying to shake off the intruder behind him. How could Kiraloya let Fafnir get away so easily? He directly grabbed the hair behind Fafnir's back and wildly punched at it. The wolf and the dragon began to fight in the sky. On the ground, although Hags was extremely dissatisfied with his father's behavior of snatching the kill, he didn't dare to wipe the cold sweat off his forehead when he saw the thrilling battle between Kiraloya and the evil dragon. But even so, he still remembered his identity. While watching the battle, he quickly began to command the werewolf guards to rescue the scene of the disaster. "Old man, don't fight above the village. Stay away. We don't have much farmland left." Hags even didn't hurry to roar. Kiraloya frowned at this moment. He gradually felt powerless. In the end, he was still old. He couldn't help but bitterly laugh. Then, he took a deep breath and stopped attacking Fafnir's back. Instead, he directly climbed onto Fafnir's head and grabbed Fafnir's dragon horn with both hands. "How is it? Is it very uncomfortable?" Old Kiraloya laughed. "When I was young, I often fought with your father. I know a lot about your golden dragon's weakness. It wasn't as simple as grabbing the dragon horn. It required a special part of the huge dragon horn and a special force to make the golden dragon feel uncomfortable. Even in the middle of a riot, Fafnir couldn't help but groan when the vital part was hit by such a professional method." Kiraloya didn't care about this fellow's strangeness at this moment and suddenly said, "Anyway, we have to go and see Balegan. Let's just go like this. Save some time." With that, Kiraloya's arm muscles swelled. He forcibly grabbed the dragon horn and twisted Fafnir's head in a certain direction. "Don't worry, I'll treat you well on the way. Descendant of old Fafnir, I'll definitely make you unforgettable. Regret coming to my territory to behave atrociously." Under Kiraloya's method and violent control, Fafnir let out a strange cry again. Then, he pierced through the sky and instantly rushed out of Kiraloya's stronghold. After flying through the entire werewolf territory, It was the neutral chaotic area, 5. After passing through the 5th chaotic area, it was the territory of the 13 vampire clans. Kuraloya! Kuraloya! The werewolves and orcs in the stronghold cheered heartily. Their hero saved the stronghold from danger again. At this moment, the young master of the werewolf clan stood silently on the cliff, looking at Fafnir, who had become a small black. The female werewolf maid behind him came forward to comfort him. "Young master, don't worry. The old leader will be fine. He's a legendary hero." So F** King Cool. Unexpectedly, Hags muttered to himself, "I also want to ride like this once, maids." The two werewolf girls suddenly stopped talking. At this moment, Luaccio couldn't help but chuckle in the massage lounge. The 3 female vampires who were hit by the big black stick were still in a deep sleep. Boss Luo, Miss Maid, and Maria changed into the uniform of the escort team. The reason why Boss Luo laughed was that Maria was drawing a face with a marker on her headgear. Of course, her drawing skills needed to be improved. Then, she tightened the headgear as much as possible and drew something like hair. After putting on the hood, Maria's headgear seemed to have been reborn, although it still looked weird. "I tried my best." After Maria shouted a few words in her heart, she looked at Master Pansy with resentment. Miss Maid didn't seem to see it. She just carefully arranged some special designs for women on Boss Luo's uniform and casually commented, "Well, the design of this uniform is not bad. It's very beautiful after wearing it." Luaccio casually told Miss Maid to show off her hobby. "Are you done? Send the crops back to the farm." Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, but the other party didn't come in directly, probably because she knew what was going on in this room. Maria was shocked and then made a gesture to calm them down. She quickly walked to the door, lowered her voice, and changed her voice. "Soon, we'll be out soon." "Why does your voice sound weird?" Maria said calmly. "Is it? Maybe my throat is a little dry after talking too much?" The female vampire outside the door suddenly laughed. "Don't tell me you're shouting too loudly? Be careful, slut. There are many middle-level nobles around here. Quickly finish your work and come out." "Okay." The footsteps gradually faded away. Maria sighed softly, then opened the door and observed outside the corridor for a while. At this moment, Elizabeth's voice sounded in their ears. "Ladies, I'll tell you how to get to the place where they gather. You must be careful. And Brother Luaccio's uniform looks really good." "Thank you." Maria couldn't bear to watch anymore. She took the lead and began to move forward carefully. Not long after, with the help of Elizabeth, the few of them successfully arrived at the rendezvous point. "Don't look back, don't look back. Someone is coming from behind." Elizabeth's voice suddenly sounded. "Just keep walking like this, don't change your speed, be natural." "Yes, just like this. Brother Luaccio did a good job." Maria was too lazy to complain, but the female vampire who appeared behind suddenly said, "Hey! You guys go to the 4th door, there are a few more crops. There. The 4th door is in front, go straight and then turn left." Elizabeth continued to remind them. This time, Maria didn't say anything. She nodded and said, "Okay." After that, she followed Elizabeth's instructions and went to the 4th door. The 4th door, the lounge inside the door. This was a place specially provided for high-level crops to rest after the sacrifice. Because the taste of the high-level crops was too delicious, the upper-class nobles would eat more than the standard amount each time. Even so, the servants who assisted in the management of the crops couldn't argue with the upper-class nobles because of this. Therefore, they settled for the next best thing. Every time after the crops finished eating, the high-level crops would undergo temporary conditioning in this lounge before they left. Basically, it was in the form of infusion. At the same time, they would also check if there were any upper-class nobles who couldn't hold back and left seeds or other things to the crops, thus destroying the value of the crops. Which upper-class noble did this with a trace of noble blood in her body? This type seems to be exclusive to Mr. Babak. It's him again. It's like this every time. The servant who was responsible for taking care of the crops couldn't help but frown. Then, he waved his hand helplessly and said, "Go and get the number 7 serum and inject it into her. Otherwise, she will mutate before she returns to the farm." Yes. Although their conversation didn't escape the girl who wore the white robe, she didn't seem to hear them. This was because there was a needle inserted into her arm, and she was injected with a specially formulated nutrient solution. Moreover, she had entered a shallow sleep state. There were a total of 3 high-level crops undergoing conditioning in this lounge. Other than the girl who needed to be injected with the serum, there was another girl and a boy. The other boy also fell into a shallow sleep state. As for the third girl, she suddenly opened her eyes after the staff left. She walked out of her lounge and pulled out the needle on the back of her hand. Then, she walked to the girl who needed to be injected with the serum. She gently placed her palm on the forehead of the sleeping girl. The sleeping girl had a blissful smile on her face, as if she had encountered something wonderful in her dream. But at this moment, her blissful smile gradually disappeared and was replaced by a look of fear, as if she was experiencing something terrible. And on her face, there was a strange smile that was similar to the happy smile of a dormant young girl. After a while, she finally withdrew her hand. When she heard the sound of footsteps approaching, she hurriedly returned to her resting area, inserted the needle, and slowly closed her eyes. The standard name in front of her resting area was Mina. However, this time, it wasn't the staff who went to get the serum that came in. Instead, it was 3 guys wearing the escort team's uniform. That's it. Door number 4. When Elizabeth's voice sounded, Luaccio stepped forward and opened the door. This was mainly because although Maria was disguised, she still couldn't directly show up. As soon as he entered the door, Boss Luo directly looked at one of the 3 lounges. Mobile version of reading website, Chapter 1336. After noticing her master's gaze, Miss Maid followed Boss Luo's gaze and looked at the resting cabin. But Luaccio looked away automatically after a few seconds. He sighed slowly, and his fingers inadvertently touched the prayer beads on his wrist. He said in a low voice, "It's like having an addiction. If I don't pay attention, I'll be attracted to it. This won't do. At least I have to pay attention during this period of time." As he said, he walked directly into the resting cabin from the door. In fact, the staff who left began to return. Luaccio and Miss Maid put on their hoods, leaving only half of their faces. Basically, it was difficult to distinguish them at a glance. At least, the attendants working here weren't sensitive enough to distinguish them. After they saw the uniforms of the escort team, they began to be respectful. "Are you here to take away these crops, my 3 lords?" The 2 attendants lowered their heads slightly. Due to the overly strict hierarchy, they did not even dare to take the initiative to peek at each other's faces without permission, even though most of the people in the escort team were lower-ranked nobles. "Are you ready?" Luaccio lowered his voice and said. One of the attendants quickly said, "Yes, one of them needs to be injected with the serum. We'll give her the injection right away." "Well, let's do it." Luaccio nodded. The 2 attendants walked quickly to the girl who needed to be injected with the serum. But they were a little surprised. Before the injection, they obviously noticed the nightmarish expression on the girl's face. Strange, why did her index drop so much? Maybe the factor of the noble blood started to take effect? Hasn't there been a similar situation recently? Maybe. His companion nodded. "Inject as soon as possible, don't let my lords wait for too long." "Excuse me, is it true that it happens sometimes?" Luaccio's voice suddenly came. He couldn't help but laugh at himself in his heart. Perhaps it was because he had always been trying to preserve his nature, but at the same time, he couldn't help but preserve his human nature. How nice. Hearing this, one of the attendants didn't stop and continued to inject the serum. The other attendant replied respectfully, "Yes, but as long as the serum is injected, everything will be fine very quickly. Moreover, we are now using a new type of serum vaccine, which was recently developed. It can increase the resistance of crops to infection." Infection? Luochu still didn't know what the so-called infection meant, but he didn't plan to spend money to buy it, so he nodded and asked casually, "Infection, is it really that serious?" Perhaps it was because the subordinate noble was more easygoing. The attendant didn't think much and said directly, "Yes, it's better now, we can control it. Some time ago it was really a disaster. Infection was like a human plague, it directly broke out. I heard that when the outbreak was at its peak, nearly 30% of the crops in the 13 families' farms were infected. They either committed suicide or went insane, so they couldn't be used by the nobles at all. They could only pick out some that still had the ability to move and send them to the configuration field for mating." Luochu nodded calmly and said casually, "Have you guys studied the cause of this infection?" At this time, the attendant who injected the serum had finished his work and said with a serious face, "We studied this infection at the first moment, sir. After all, we have to maintain the freshness of the crops at all times." Luochu smiled and said, "Then tell me your opinion, I also want to hear your research. Maybe this was just a chat while waiting, or maybe it was a kind of investigation by the nobles." The two attendants quickly realized that this might be an opportunity. If they could be valued by the nobles and become their personal attendants, they could naturally get out of the current situation. Even if they were only the personal attendants of the lower nobles, they could still be much higher than the ordinary attendants. It was probably from a third-class servant to a second-class servant. They almost rushed to answer. This infection is caused by the original world view of the peak crop. Sir, you should know that the higher the level of the crop, the more complicated the cultivation process is. From the moment they are born, they will be cultivated strictly according to the preferences of the nobles. The farm will cultivate them according to various settings. We all know why the blood of the high-level crop tastes so good. That's because during the cultivation process, they have been written into the important person's feelings. Only this kind of wholehearted devotion to the superior nobles can allow the nobles to feel the long-awaited taste of the first blood when they eat. After all, the superior nobles may no longer be able to find their first target to suck blood from. What nonsense are you talking about? Do you think the sir doesn't know? The attendant beside suddenly interrupted. I don't know, at this time. The one who interrupted ignored his companions who worked in the same room and agreed to fight for everything. He directly interrupted and said, "In general, what is needed is something called the happiness index. Of course, sir, you also know what this is. So the next part is the main point. According to my observation, after the infection, it starts from the happiness index directly. At first, we all thought that it might be some kind of external thought transmission. But later, after careful research, we found that the crop's happiness index drop was not because of the impact of the thought. They directly felt fear, or it should be said that they were deprived of happiness index. They couldn't feel any happiness from the dedication. It felt like they were abandoned and then fell into a kind of closed loop. Basically, once the closed loop is completed, it can't be opened and can only become a waste. The source, Luochu said casually. His eyes inadvertently looked at the hibernation cabin at the beginning. We really don't know the source. The attendants shook their heads. After all, each farm often exchanges crops. Maybe it's cross-infection or the mutation caused by too many hybrids. However, we have developed a new type of serum that can offset the side effects of the noble blood factor to a certain extent and also increase the index of crops. Although this will affect the life of crops, after all, they only need to harvest until they are 18 years old. Priority to ensure the privileges of the nobles. Luocchio said suddenly, from the production model of crops to the final mating. It's really like colonization. The attendants had to be silent. Crops were actually no different from slaves in the colonies. The upper nobles would squeeze out all the value of enslaved people. It didn't seem to be wrong to apply it to economics. The formula of capitalist equals vampire unfolded in a vivid way inside the castle of the Toridu clan. Thank you for your answers. Boss Luo smiled at this moment. You let me know so much. It's our honor to serve you, sir. The two attendants quickly responded respectfully. Can we take them away? Luocchio shook his head. We're about to miss the time to leave. Immediately. We'll wake them up immediately. At this moment, watching the two attendants start to wake up the three boys and girls, Maria, who had been standing behind Boss Luo and Miss Maid, suddenly said in a low voice, I've always known about the existence of a farm. But I didn't expect that the nobles of the 13 families would be so perverted. Character setting, dedication? To raise humans as their closest kin, and then wash away their blood. What a bunch of lunatics! Following Maria's words, Miss Maid suddenly said, Miss Balaclava, I remember when I went to your laundry in the morning, you seemed to have said that you bought a batch of a farm, True Blood, and made a lot of money. Maria automatically omitted the word balaclava. She shook her head at this moment and said rather seriously, I thought we don't do business with those blood traffickers. Luocchio smiled at this moment. Miss Maria, if you have a chance to liberate all these crops from the farm, but you have to give up all your life and even your soul, would you be willing? Maria didn't know why this little brother of the healing department suddenly talked about such a heavy topic. She was stunned at first, then she smiled bitterly and shook her head. Let's not talk about whether this hypothesis is true or not. Even if it is, I probably can't do it, right? Don't laugh at me here. I can only promise not to do business with blood traffickers. If the price is high enough, such a promise may be forgotten in an instant. Probably most of the choices. That was why the farm could always exist in the inhuman territory. And the Inhumans, living in the farm, could only turn a blind eye to it. There were even the so-called true blood hunters. But this Miss Maria is also very realistic. Luocchio said softly, being able to be loyal to yourself and admit your shortcomings without any modification. Isn't it great? I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Don't be so considerate, okay? Maria took a deep breath. She secretly scolded herself for not being able to resist this type of person. She had suffered a lot in the past, but she still couldn't change her habit. She secretly pinched herself, thinking that even an old woman would never fall into the vortex of gentleness. Instead, she said seriously, let's stop the gossip. Let's leave this place quickly. Just in case, you really don't want to apply some blood dye? As she said that, the busty witch habitually reached for her collar, but the uniform of the escort team had a round collar. Just as Maria was thinking about how to put her hand in, 2 vampire servants had already brought the 3 boys and girls who had woken up. They were almost the same as the little Harry that Luocchio met in the farm. The boys' and girls' eyes were always so kind and gentle, just like pets. The girl who looked at the serum seemed to have forgotten the fear she had when she was in a light sleep. At this time, her face was glowing again, and she elegantly bowed in front of the 3 adults. What's your name? Luocchio looked at the girl who had woken up from the hibernation pod. She was about 13 or 14 years old. Mina. The girl innocently tilted her head and answered, Sister, do you need my contribution? Luocchio walked forward, bent down slightly, and lifted his hat a little, revealing his eyes. He asked with interest, Then, what can you contribute to me? She was surprised by the beauty of the other party, and then a flash of fear because of the other party's eyes. In the end, she seemed to be slightly flustered because of this question. However, the girl soon showed a burning gaze again. Then, she pulled down the clothes on her shoulders, revealing her smooth shoulders. She said shyly, "They said that Mina is a younger sister's character setting. Will elder sister like it? Mina loves you very much." "But you already have someone who loves you." Luocio smiled, and reached out to gently pull the girl's clothes back. At the same time, his fingers inadvertently touched the 2 shallow wounds on the girl's neck, and said softly, "And he should also love you very much." The girl suddenly took a step back, and her hands even grasped her collar. She looked at the beautiful big sister in front of her in surprise, and seemed to be more and more flustered. "Mina, you can't be rude to the adults." At this time, the girl next to her hurriedly scolded, and then walked in front of Luocio, and apologized very sincerely. "I'm sorry, Mina's grades in school are a little unstable. Please don't blame her. She might have just been too happy after the contribution, and that's why she forgot herself." Luocio waved his hand, looked at the girl, and asked casually, "This contribution, are you happy?" The girl nodded vigorously, "Very happy. I like Papa Baboki the most. Although I don't know who will be the next one, but Doni is looking forward to it." Luocio then looked at the third boy, who was younger, and his face was still ignorant, but at this time, he also nodded energetically. "Farm, do you like it?" he asked the 3 boys and girls at the same time. Other than Mina, who was a little hesitant, Duo and I and the youngest boy didn't even have to think before they gave a definite answer. Doni smiled sweetly. "It's a very happy thing to be able to live with everyone." Boss Luo suddenly remembered what Baligan said. If everyone acted more realistically, then there was no difference. There was no difference. At least in his black and white vision, the soul of the girl in front of him was shining brightly. Chapter 1337. Soon, with the help of Elizabeth, the 3 young boys and girls were sent to the starting point, a cable device that connected the castle to the surrounding cliff. On the huge hanging basket there were already many young people waiting, but in front of the device, in addition to the members of the escort team, there were also several guards from the patrol team. They seemed to be checking something. "Brother Luocio, don't worry. I have a way to make them not notice anything for the time being." Elizabeth's confident voice suddenly sounded. In fact, the boss and Miss Maid didn't have anything to worry about. Luocio was just participating in the process of doing this kind of thing. Success or failure for him was an experience. But Maria was different. The mask was the most important thing. Although she had a human face painted on it, it was just an act of self-comfort. "You 3, hurry up and send them here." At this time, in front of the device, a female vampire who seemed to be the leader of the escort team hurriedly shouted. Probably because there were patrol guards here, she seemed to be particularly serious. Maria soon found that even though these guys had noticed her, they didn't seem to feel strange because of her strange appearance. "What's wrong with them?" Maria couldn't help but wonder. "Probably an ability similar to consciousness interference," Miss Maid said casually. "Consciousness interference?" Maria was stunned, then quickly reacted, and then she was secretly shocked. The vampire girl was still in the room of the castle at this time. Not only did she detect along the way, but she also communicated with her mind all the way. Now she could even interfere with consciousness interference from a distance? What an omnipotent ability! Elizabeth's voice sounded again, but it seemed to be more strenuous. "I now let them feel that they are seeing someone they know, but it can't be maintained for too long, so you have to hurry up. Hurry up." The voice gradually became intermittent. It seemed that in such a short time, the vampire girl had seriously exceeded her burden to interfere with so many members of the escort team and patrol guards at the same time. "It's still too difficult if it goes on like this." Zhong Luoyue, who was hiding and silently observing all of this, bit at this time, and then quickly let out a frightened scream. "Ah! Who are you? It's not good to come over. Why would I do something so risky with so little return?" Zhong Luoyue lamented, and then began to quickly flee from her hiding place. The reason why she didn't leave immediately after arriving at their destination with Luaccio and the others was to prevent any special situation from happening. It was the last line of insurance. The expression of the guards in front of the cable device changed slightly because of this. The captain of the guard said directly, "Quick, send the crop away. Let's go and take a look. It might be the guy who broke into the castle today. Hurry up." Yes. Amidst the chaos, the remaining crops were quickly sent into the gondola, and the members of the escort team also caught up. Luaccio and the other two lowered their heads and successfully sat in the gondola. The device was also activated immediately. Seeing this small group of patrolling guards hurriedly returning to the castle, and the vampire escorting the team seemed to be concerned about what was happening and had no time to observe the companions beside her. Maria slowly breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you so much this time, Miss Vampire," Maria hurriedly whispered. She knew that Elizabeth could hear her. "Wait a moment, after you get off the gondola, leave from the forest on the left. That place has just been patrolled, so there won't be any danger for now. I can't maintain contact with you if you go further away. You must be careful." "Thank you, Elizabeth. You've helped us a lot." Luaccio also thanked her in a low voice. Hee. This was the little girl's slightly shy laughter. Then, her voice sounded in Luaccio's ears again. "Brother Luaccio, can we still meet? Can I come to you in the future?" Maria didn't seem to hear it. Miss Maid, the blocked perception hadn't been activated by the boss yet, so she didn't seem to hear it. Probably, this was a private conversation. Luaccio said softly at this time, "If, the next time we meet, I'm not like this anymore, will you be afraid? If you're not like this, what will you be like?" Elizabeth's voice began to become intermittent, probably beyond the limit of her current ability. "No matter. I must." "Brother," she didn't hear the complete answer. The gondola gradually approached the edge of the cliff. At this time, there was always a gaze, which had been looking at the position of a tower in the castle. The girl standing in the corner with a belly, Mina. When Boss Luo felt the girl's gaze and looked over, the girl sensitively noticed something and hurriedly moved away. She became flustered again, and then quickly concealed this panic, and began to walk to the side to talk with others. On the gondola cable car, a group of boys and girls were whispering about their contributions to the adults, just like children sharing their little secrets with each other. Many members of the escort team just watched all this with cold eyes. However, at this time, a huge black shadow appeared above everyone's head. In the sky there was a huge body and a huge roar. Boom! The device on the edge of the cliff was instantly destroyed by something, and a huge flame soared into the sky. The gondola in the gondola shook crazily. Maria at this time grabbed the edge of the gondola in horror. "What's going on?" Boss Luo looked up, looking at the troublesome thing in the sky. Before he could speak, the cable connecting the two places suddenly broke, and the entire gondola fell down the cliff in an instant. Everyone in the escort team, "Save them!" At this time, the female leader shouted loudly. She opened her hands, one to the left and one to the right. She spread her bat wings and began to float in the air. The rest of the members, some who had the ability to spread their wings, followed suit. As for those who didn't have this ability, they could only try their best to grab a crop and then dangerously cling to the cliff. However, there were also many crops that directly fell into the deep valley at this time. On a certain high tower in the castle of the Torito clan, Busby once again looked forward alone. After he witnessed everything that had happened, he didn't hesitate at all and directly jumped down from the tall tower. The huge dark red bat wings he spread out were like a paraglider, and he rushed directly to the place where the gondola fell. The moment he left, the air behind where Busby originally stood was distorted, and then another figure gradually appeared. Baligan, the current acting Grand Duke of the Torito clan. Really dishonest. Baligan shook his head slightly, and there was a faint smile on his face. Then, his gaze quickly looked at the initiator of the destruction around the destroyer. A huge, golden dragon. The golden dragon had no intention of stopping at this time, and it directly crashed into the castle. The enchantment built outside the castle couldn't be opened in time. With a loud noise, Fafnir crashed directly into the castle. How huge was the golden dragon's body? With such a huge crash, even this castle that had been painstakingly built for many years was directly destroyed without any enchantment protection. Several towers were broken at this moment, and the east wing of the castle began to collapse. Beilgeng's face was slightly ashen as he watched what happened in this instant. At the same time, a figure jumped down from the back of the golden dragon at the moment it crashed into the castle. Then, with a slight cushion of his legs, he landed steadily in front of Baligan and successfully landed. "Yo, Baligan, long time no see. Ha 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 ha." Kaloya waved his hand and boldly greeted the acting Grand Duke, who had an ugly expression on his face. He hadn't seen him for a long time. "Although I thought that you would be the first to arrive. After all, you have been this impatient for so many years." Baligan narrowed his eyes at this time, "But even with my imagination, I really didn't think that you would appear in this way. Kaloya, let's put aside the fact that you and I are destined to be enemies. Just this appearance alone makes me have the impulse to do the same in your stockade. What are you afraid of? You have plenty of money." Kaloya didn't care at all. "If this castle is broken, just build another one. My stockade is made of mud, bricks, tiles, and wood. It's like a slum. For a great noble of the 13 clans like you, it will only lower your status if you go there. It's better not to go. Of course, during the reconstruction, I don't mind sending you some labor. We don't have anything else, but we have great strength. And labor is also very cheap." Baligan slowly heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he looked at the destroyed place and the giant dragon that was stuck in the castle and began to struggle frantically. He frowned. What exactly happened? This, if I'm not mistaken, should be the last golden dragon living in the unsetting sun forest? Yes, it's the only child of old Fafnir. Kaloya squinted his eyes and smiled at this time. "Speaking of which, during the war, old Fafnir was tricked by you and died after withstanding an attack from the demons. This time, his descendant crashed into your castle. What do you think? By the way, on the way here, I have taught this junior a good lesson." Baligan said expressionlessly, "I'm asking why it became violent." At this time, Kiraloya looked around and asked, "Where is the real Grand Duke of your Toridu? Don't you plan to wake up after such a big commotion? Or is it that decades ago, after the Grand Dukes of the 13 clans caused chaos to the legendary Erex, they actually suffered more serious injuries than what the outside world said?" Baligan said indifferently, "The sacred blood ritual is about to be held. How can the Grand Dukes be distracted by such a trivial matter?" Kaloya thought for a while, then the radio wave finally connected with Baligan. He frowned and said, "Then the matter of you looking for me, you didn't tell them? Let's not talk about this first." Baligan let out a breath and said seriously, "Kaloya, I've also notified the others. Before they arrive, you and I will work together to suppress this young Fafnir. I will really go to your stronghold. I'll greet you with some local specialties. Is the blood of fat pigs to your taste? I'll definitely greet you with the strongest and most fertile sow in our village." Yeah. Behind the acting Grand Duke, something was shining. Kiraloya's pupils contracted slightly. "Is this the spoil of war from that year? Well, I think it's better to suppress this baby dragon first. I'll take the lead, you follow." With that said, without waiting for Baligan's response, Kaloya directly roared, jumped down, and punched the golden dragon stuck in the castle. At this time, the affected vampires in the castle also rushed out one after another. In just a moment, the vampires above the castle had become densely packed. Among them was the little vampire Wylissabet. At this time, she opened a pair of small bat wings and struggled to lift Zhong Luoyue. She flapped her small wings hard to prevent herself from sinking. Wah! Ah! There was a familiar scream. Miss Witch hurriedly tore open her collar and successfully took out her magic wand. Then, she hurriedly chanted a spell. Finally, in the dark gray mud, a huge plant grew crazily. Then, it opened its leaves and caught Miss Witch. Then, the rebound force bounced her to the ground. Then, she raised her buttocks and lay on the ground. Boss Luo landed lightly on the ground, then stretched out his hands and estimated the direction. Only a swoosh sound was heard, and he firmly caught Miss Maid. 10 points. Miss Witch hurriedly spat, then hurriedly got up from the ground. Looking up, she saw that it was dark above. The bottom of the cliff was really deep. Even so, it was not that there was no light source around. On the surrounding cliffs, there were various kinds of ferns emitting blue fluorescent light. It reflected this place like an underwater world under the sun. Then, there were corpses everywhere. Some had been buried in the grayish-black soil, and only a small part of the dry bones was exposed. Some were complete corpses that were directly exposed, probably because the time of death was closer. At this time, another figure fell from above. It was a member of the escort team. Seeing this, Luochio quietly clicked his fingers. This rapidly falling figure, at the moment when it was about to land, seemed to be supported by something, and then gently landed on the ground with a frightened face. After the vampire landed on the ground, he looked at his surroundings and shivered. He seemed to be very afraid and in pain. She screamed, then suddenly jumped up, her long nails directly inserted into the smooth rock, and she crazily climbed up. However, when she climbed up about 10 meters, something suddenly shot out from the rock. A black object directly pierced her body, and then sucked her dry. In the scream, she went from being alive to being dead in just a few seconds. A dry corpse directly slid down. "What the hell is this?" Maria screamed. "The lost Fong." The answer was a deep and magnetic voice. Above, a pair of huge bat wings slowly flapped and then landed. A male vampire. Then, his hands were holding a girl, Mina. Chapter 1338. The Roar. This time, it wasn't a strange rhythmic cry, but a real cry of pain. The golden dragon, who was trapped in the castle, not only had to withstand Kaloya's fierce attacks, but it also had to resist the siege of a large number of noble-level vampires from the Torido clan who were quite angry because of the destruction of the castle. Some couldn't break through Fafnir's defense, but some could make him feel pain. But the most important thing was still Kaloya's attack. Along the way, the golden dragon had been constantly squeezing out his explosive energy. At this time, his body was in a relatively empty state. In fact, it did not even have the strength to move its paws. Its limbs were weak, and it was not even interested in anything. It felt like it could stay stuck here for 80 to 80 to 80 to 80 years. In short, it was sage time. TSK, the golden dragon's skin is really thick. This old guy is as annoying as his father. Kaloya paused, slightly out of breath. First, he was no longer as brave as he used to be, and his physical strength had declined severely over the years. Second, he didn't really want to kill the descendant of his former comrade. Being able to destroy the castle of the Torido clan was already beyond his expectations. Although they had fought together 100 years ago, the hatred between the vampires and werewolves obviously didn't fade away because of that. After the war 100 years ago, all the inhuman clans signed a truce agreement to rest and recuperate. However, after 100 years of silence, the damage of that year had almost recovered, and the inhuman clans had long been surging in the dark. The inhuman domain seemed to be a paradise for the inhuman, but that was only the feeling of the new generation. As for the actual situation, the old generation of the war 100 years ago naturally wouldn't say it casually. "Young Fafnir, if you've woken up, then cooperate with me and find a chance to leave." Taking advantage of the chaos, Kaloya quietly sent a message to the motionless golden dragon. Otherwise, if you really wake up one of the 13 Grand Dukes who is sleeping here, even you won't be able to bear it if the whole Torido clan cooperates, right? Besides, after destroying the castle so recklessly, you shouldn't have much physical strength now, right? Fafnir really wanted to say that as a peerlessly beautiful golden dragon, retreating like this would greatly ruin its perfect image. But it seemed that the words of the head werewolf made some sense. That damned Kelowna Shinryu! It never thought that a Shinryu from the east would do such a shameless thing. How unladylike! No one would want a tomboy. I got it. What do you want me to do? After a moment of consideration, the golden dragon, who had clearly recognized its current form, quickly agreed to Kuraloa's suggestion. I'll cooperate with you, legendary hero. Besides, your strength surprises me. You're a very outstanding male. The charm of a male is so dazzling on you. Lord Kuraloya, please allow me to address you as such? Is this generation's golden dragon so easy to talk to? Kaloya was startled. In his impression, this dragon's father was very arrogant back then, as if he was the #1 expert in the world, and was insufferably arrogant. Since that's the case, then you do this and I do this and I do this. Understand? Understood. By the way, Lord Kuraloya, are you really in your twilight years? But I can't see it at all. The lines of your muscles are so good. How did you do it? You just need to exercise more. While paying attention to Bailey's attitude and the gazes of so many vampires, Kuraloya didn't have the time to think carefully about the strange question of this young Fafnir. Don't talk nonsense. Do as I say. So manly. At this time, a huge airwave erupted from Kuraloya's body, instantly breaking the formation of a large number of vampires. Then, with a mighty momentum, he desperately attacked the golden dragon. At the same time, he thought, did this guy's head get smashed by me when he came here? Rumble! At this time, Fafnir, who had recovered a bit of physical strength, let out a timely roar. This legendary hero's punch directly worsened the situation of the Torido clan and the castle that was in danger. Half of the city wall had disappeared, and cracks had appeared on the other side of the wall. At this moment, a violent wind blew, and a golden whirlwind rolled up from Fafnir's side and rushed into the sky. The crumbling half of the castle finally couldn't bear it and directly disintegrated. Dust billowed, and the battle in the golden whirlwind couldn't be seen, but it must be extremely tragic. However, the acting Grand Duke of the Torido clan looked more and more terrible at this time. On purpose, this old wolf in his twilight years definitely did it on purpose. A cold light flashed in Bailey's eyes, and then he snorted coldly and waved his palm gently. Something seemed to flash behind him and disappeared in an instant. However, the raging golden whirlwind calmed down in an instant. After the whirlwind stopped, Kuraloya flew backward as if he was blasted out by something. As he flew, he shouted loudly, "This guy's skin is really tough. Let me fight with him for another 300 rounds. No need." Bailey snorted coldly at this time. "I don't want the foundation of this castle to be destroyed by you. Let him go. Isn't this your idea? Kuraloya. You know me best." Kuraloya laughed. Of course, this conversation was not heard by the other vampires. Balegan heaved a sigh of relief at this time. He looked at the entire exposed part of the castle that had turned into ruins and couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. No matter how good his temper was, he couldn't be relieved that the place he lived in was torn down like this. At this time, Balegan said calmly, "It's a pity that this place is no longer suitable for greeting people. Otherwise, if you came from afar, I would definitely greet you properly." At this time, the golden dragon had disappeared. Bailey didn't seem to know this at all. He smiled and said, "Do you want to wait for the others to arrive, or do you want to know something about them?" Kuraloya glanced at the huge abyss below the mountain, then waved his hand and said, "My brain isn't working well. You can tell me now. Otherwise, when everyone is here, I won't be able to get a word in edgewise. You better do your homework first. I don't believe you. Bailey smiled slightly, more gentle than when he was a dormitory supervisor in the farm. Then this way, please. I should be able to clean up a place to talk. They slowly descended into the ruins of the castle, while Lisbeth was still trying to flap her small bat wings. If only Moon could be gentler, she thought at this time. But Zhong Luoyue didn't notice Lisbeth's thoughts at all. At this time, her mind was full of the battle scene, especially the battle between Kuraloya and the Golden Dragon. Although the magic of the inhuman territory had reached the peak of her knowledge, it had been peaceful. She couldn't help but feel that she had just gone to a foreign place. But this level of battle, inhuman. For the first time, she clearly understood the real meaning of this term. That bastard said that money was also a very powerful superpower. Compared to this, money was just like waste paper. All of a sudden, she started to look forward to her first transformation. However, the third daughter of the Zhong family subconsciously ignored a problem. Since the headquarters of the Torito clan had been destroyed so horribly, it seemed to be a problem whether they were still willing to help her transform in a short period of time. Slowly landing, when her feet touched the ground, Zhong Luoyue suddenly felt a heavy weight on her shoulder. It turned out that while Lisbeth directly lay on her body, gasping for breath. Moon, why don't you eat less recently? The vampire girl said pitifully at this time. Oh, okay. What did you say? Under the strange blue light emitted by the algae, the male vampire holding the girl Mina slowly landed. The moment he landed, he seemed to be a little unstable, but after he insisted on putting Mina down, he suddenly knelt on the ground. It turned out that there were more than 10 terrible wounds on his back. Brother! The girl Mina was very anxious at this time. Looking at the wounds on the male vampire's back that kept bleeding, she seemed to be a little at a loss of what to do. But the wounds on Busby's back began to heal quickly. Because of the powerful self-healing ability of vampires, the wounds quickly shrank and then began to close. With the help of Mina, Busby stood up again. Even so, his face was much paler than the average vampire. Mina began to carefully wipe Busby's face. Looking at his appearance, it seemed that when he came down, he had gone through a terrible battle. Luochio and the other three quietly watched. Until Mina finished cleaning Busby's messy appearance, Maria clicked her tongue and was greatly amazed. What kind of godly appearance was this? Although the 13 clans were basically full of handsome men and beautiful women, this one in front of her was really too beautiful. Miss Witch couldn't help but sneak a peek at Boss Luo next to her, and then wailed again. These two, what kind of godly combination is this? And of course, Master Prismatic Pansy was also a beauty that couldn't be ignored. But as a woman, of course, a woman would look at a man. Why would a woman look at a woman? My breasts are bigger. Are the wounds on your body better? Luochio's voice broke the silence between the two sides. Busby nodded and then frowned slightly. He looked at the 3 guys in the escort team's uniform in front of him and didn't say anything. Luochio didn't care about Busby's doubts, and just asked curiously, I heard you mention the lost Fong. Are you referring to those strange blood-sucking vines that grew out of the cliff? You were attacked too, right? Busby glanced at Mina, and the girl understood at this time, so she helped him slowly walk in. Busby's voice was hoarse at this time, yes. But to be precise, these vines are not the main body of the lost Fong. Generally speaking, they are like the capillaries of the lost Fong. Can you tell me more about it? Luochio was even more curious. In Maria's view, he even reached out to touch the rock on the cliff next to him without fear of death. Little. The witch couldn't even speak to stop him, and Boss Luo had already pressed his hand directly on the rock. But it seemed that nothing happened and she was relieved. Busby saw it and his expression didn't change, but he slowly said, The lost Fong. Legend has it that it is the Fong of the world's first vampire. Legend has it that after it died, its whole body became the earth, and the Fong became a mountain. As if realizing something, Miss Witch suddenly exclaimed, "You're saying the place we're in right now is the mouth of the first vampire that died?" Busby glanced at Miss Witch's funny makeup again, and said indifferently, "The territories of the 13 clans are all built on top of the Lost Fong Mountain. This is basically what the adult vampires in the 13 clans are told. Have you forgotten?" "Of course." Maria quickly waved her hand and said, "No. This isn't because we suddenly fell into such a terrifying place and got scared. Ahahaha, how can I forget, right? No, if it's dead, why do these things still suck blood?" Busby said casually, "Probably instincts. For powerful individuals, even if their souls have dissipated, their bodies can still be in an active state. It's just that without the driving of consciousness, everything can only follow simple instincts." "I see. Well, I think so too." Miss Witch quickly nodded, and then asked as if she was familiar with him, "By the way, do you know how to leave here? I mean, avoid the attacks of these vampires and leave here?" Busby's eyes suddenly flickered, and then he nodded. "Follow me, there is a safe way to leave ahead. Pay attention and follow closely, and try not to make too much noise. These things are very sensitive." "Understood." Maria nodded and quickly said, "We will definitely follow you closely. By the way, how should I address you, big brother? I am new here, and I don't know many nobles. If I have offended you in any way, please forgive me." Chapter 1339. Along the way, the male vampire who claimed to be Norman and the girl, Mina, led the way, while Luaccio and the other two followed unhurriedly. So far, the two sides had hardly communicated with each other except for the initial conversation. They just walked in silence. On both sides of the road, even the soil they stepped on could be seen scattered bones. They were of almost all shapes and sizes, and there were also many species of creatures. This seemed to mean that once one entered this place, it would be very difficult to find a chance to escape. A gust of chilly wind blew past, and when it passed through the huge crack, it made a humming sound, as if some kind of creature was growling. Maria couldn't help shivering. She wrapped her robe tightly, then quietly approached Luaccio and Miss Maid, whispering, "Do you feel that this Norman is strange?" Luaccio didn't ask why but asked, "Miss Maria, do you see anything?" Miss Witch said solemnly at this time, "This place always gives me the creeps. You saw how the vampire died just now, right?" Moreover, she showed that frightened expression. "I think this place is probably a taboo place in the 13 clans, at least in the Torito clan?" Luaccio nodded slightly, indicating that he agreed with Miss Witch's statement. Maria frowned at this time, "But have you thought about it? This place is so dangerous. Normally, people shouldn't get close. But this Norman doesn't seem to be particularly afraid. And don't you find it strange? Why does he know the way out?" "Since he knows the way out, it means that he has been here before." Luaccio smiled slightly. "This is the bottom of the castle. It doesn't seem strange that he has been here before." "That's right. But I always feel that something is wrong, but I can't tell what it is." Miss Witch couldn't help but mutter in a low voice. At this time, Norman. Busby suddenly stopped and slowly turned around. He said calmly, "Now, let's rest here for a while. Remember, the instinctively active nerve endings of the Lost Fong will enter the most active state of the day, and it will last for about 3 hours. We need to wait for them to calm down." "Just rest here?" Maria couldn't help but gulp, because there were more than twice as many skeletons in this area compared to the place where they first landed. They were so densely packed that they could be found everywhere. Busby nodded and pointed ahead. There seemed to be a deep pit in front of them. "There's a place to rest down there. Also, although there are more skeletons here, it's relatively safe, because the smell of corpses and rotting bones here is enough to cover up the smell on our bodies." As he spoke, Busby embraced the young girl Mina with one hand and then jumped down. His legs slid along the edge of the deep pit, and his movements were quite skilled. It didn't take long for him to slide to the bottom of the deep pit with the young girl. Shall we give it a try? Seeing this, Luaccio looked at Miss Maid and smiled. He planned to slide down like this. Of course, he needed to carry Miss Maid in a princess carry. Unexpectedly, Miss Witch suddenly said at this time, "Watch me." Maria waved the magic wand in her hand, and then scattered a few seeds. Soon, almost at a speed visible to the naked eye, a huge plant grew on the ground. Maria then tore off 3 blanket-sized leaves from this huge plant, and then laughed briskly. She sat on one of the leaves, and then directly slid down the edge of the deep pit. There was probably a very energetic sound. In general, magician is really a very convenient profession. Luaccio took the leaves and looked at them. When he saw that Miss Maid seemed to be considering whether to play with them, he had an idea. He stacked 2 leaves together, and then carried Miss Maid to sit in front of him, and then slid down along the edge. "Will it be more interesting this way?" Boss Luo laughed in Miss Maid's ear. The servant girl chuckled and said, "Master can always make boring things interesting." Perhaps it was a question of whether he was willing to spend some time thinking about it. Making trivial and boring things more lively would naturally make life more colorful. The sliding time was very fast. When Boss Luo and Miss Maid went down to the bottom of the deep pit, they were met with Miss Witch's tsk gaze. "These 2 guys will die if they don't lovey-dovey for a while." Miss Witch, who was complaining in her heart, couldn't help but think, "Speaking of which, this master rainbow-colored linden has been famous for decades. Although such a master of secret potions, no one would believe that he doesn't have a few bottles of youth elixir. But is this considered an old cow eating young grass?" Just when Miss Witch was thinking nonsense, suddenly the voice of Norman was heard. He said, "Try to save some here. The magic element here is at least 20 times lower than outside. And you can't use secret crystals. Those things are as sensitive to secret crystals as they are to fresh blood." "Thank you for the reminder." Boss Luo nodded to him with a kind look. He didn't say anything else and walked straight ahead with Miss Mina. In front of them was a place piled up like a mountain of bones. Logically speaking, if a creature was unfortunate enough to fall from the sky after being attacked by the vampiric vines, its bones should remain where they were, just like what they saw on the way here. But the piles of bones here made it seem like someone had deliberately piled them up here. Just like that, they followed Norman into the mountain of corpses. After moving forward for a short distance, Norman stopped before a hill of skeletons. Reaching out, he pulled out what appeared to be a leg bone. The bones on the hill of skeletons began to slide off in just an instant. A gigantic and ferocious skull of a behemoth was revealed. The behemoth's mouth was still open, and the teeth on the upper and lower jaws were still sharp even now. At this time, a Norman directly led Miss Mina into the behemoth's open mouth. It was a different world. This was the first feeling that Luaccio and the other 2 had after entering the interior. The space inside didn't feel cramped at all. On the contrary, it was very spacious. A place to rest, a place to sleep, and even a place to store things. There were all kinds of simple but practical living equipment here. Although they were all made of practical bones, it still looked like someone lived here. At least, it looked like someone had lived here before. At this time, a Norman very familiarly took out an oil lamp made of bones and a tool to light a fire from a cabinet, made of bones. There were actually many mysterious algae that emitted blue fluorescence growing inside. When a Norman lit the oil lamp, it suddenly became very bright. "Sit." Norman pointed to a white bone product that looked like a chair at the side. This place was originally the skeleton of a red dragon after it died, but because it was too complete, it was directly transformed into what it is now. Although Miss Witch was a witch, after seeing such a house made of bones, she had goosebumps in her heart. How could she have the mood to make such a novel chair? She simply laughed dryly. "Well, I'm not very tired. I'll just stand." "Up to you." As a Norman spoke, He sat down at a relatively distant place. Mina, on the other hand, brought a white bone stool over and sat down beside him. It's really strange that there is such a comfortable house in this place. Miss Maid looked at the structure of the house. It seems that the person who built it probably spent a lot of effort. Perhaps he even planned to live here for a long time? How do you know? Maria couldn't help but ask curiously. Miss Maid said indifferently, if it's just a place to rest, he probably won't have the mood to play with these small things. Her gaze was fixed on a small cabinet in the corner. On the upper level of the cabinet, there were many small toys, handicrafts carved from bones, and even a vase, and on the lower level there were some tableware, of course also made of bones. At this time, a Norman also looked at the cabinet and slowly said, someone did live here in the past, and he lived here for a period of time. Who would live in such a damn place? Miss Witch couldn't help but open her mouth. Norman said indifferently, although it's dangerous here, as long as you can figure out the pattern of the nerve endings activity, it's actually a very safe place. At the same time, no one comes here to disturb you. If the person who lived here before didn't like the outside world, then there's nothing strange about it. He didn't like the outside world, or he couldn't appear in the outside world. Miss Witch shook her head. Obviously, she also noticed something. And when she looked at a Norman, her expression was a bit strange. You! Norman said expressionlessly, once there was a large-scale escape in a farm. Some humans in a farm were unfortunately trapped in this place in the process of escaping. Actually, there are many similar houses here. This is just one of them. While Boss Luo listened, he had already picked up a bone carving on the cabinet and was playing with it. Hearing this, he asked curiously, what happened to this batch of humans? Norman said, some people died in the hands of Lost Fong. Some couldn't stand the loneliness here and chose to commit suicide. Some lived here, but gradually, because of the lack of food, they couldn't survive for too long. Finally, among the crops that escaped to this place, some of them felt that returning to the farm would be better than living here, so they secretly escaped to the farm, behind everyone's back, and told them the secret of this place. Needless to say, you should be able to figure out the rest. Miss Witch said, hiss. The clansmen must have brought people here and captured all the humans here. No wonder you're so familiar with this place. Norman only stared at Miss Demonis for a few seconds, until Miss Demonis was a little frightened, afraid that she had exposed herself somehow. He suddenly said, keep quiet from now on. In about half an hour those things will start to wake up. They are sensitive to sound. As he spoke, Norman closed his eyes as if he was resting. As for the young girl, Mina, she didn't seem to be afraid at all. She leaned on him and slowly fell asleep. There's still half an hour. Can we take a look around? Boss Luo asked in a low voice at this time. Norman opened his eyes and frowned, but he didn't speak. Luoqiu smiled slightly and said, because it's rare to come to this place, I feel that it's a pity if we don't take a good look. Of course, we'll come back when it's time. A Norman just took a deep look and closed his eyes casually. He didn't refuse or agree. Thank you. Luoqiu nodded, then looked at Maria and said, do you want to go or stay here? I'd better go with you. Miss Witch thought for a while, but she didn't want to stay here alone and face this strange Norman. Fog City. The terrible disaster that happened last night didn't leave any traces, at least the destructive traces. The rain had erased the memories of ordinary people, but there was still a lot of evidence left behind because of the products of technology. It became the most inexplicable and strange thing that people were discussing this morning. Some people even said that perhaps they had been brainwashed by aliens and so on. In such a strange and quiet atmosphere, Miss Witch Jillian came to the door of an antique shop. She walked in front of the door and frowned, looking at the closed sign hanging above. She could feel some of Farrell's aura here, but Farrell's aura eventually disappeared here. The real face of this antique shop was a coordinate that led to the inhuman domain. However, the Magicians' Association had temporarily closed all the official coordinates in Britain, so this place continued to do the normal antique business. Miss Witch took a deep breath, then ignored the closed sign, directly opened the door, and walked into the antique shop. There was only one clerk, and he fainted directly on the ground. Of course, a shelf on the side had collapsed, and many antiques were scattered on the ground. Miss Witch couldn't help but shake her head. She probably knew what Farrell did after coming here. This old thing suddenly ran to the inhuman domain. What is he doing? Even so, she quickly found the coordinates placed here. The coordinates were still in a state of activation, and there were several fainted guys next to it. Miss Witch shook her head, then lifted her skirt and stepped into the coordinates, without any pressure. Anyway, she didn't need to pay the secret crystal, so of course, she would take a free ride. Chapter 1340. Gradually, some figures climbed up the cliff with difficulty from the big crack below the castle. They were the vampires of the escort team and some of the crops that fell when the golden dragon was wreaking havoc. Hurry up, come and help. Retrieve the crops. There were vampires directing the rescue work here. After the final, fierce battle between Kaloya and the Golden Dragon ended, the Golden Dragon disappeared. The acting Grand Duke Baligan didn't seem to have any intention of pursuing or even searching. At this time, he was meeting with the legendary hero of the werewolf tribe, Kaloya. Now, even the assistant of the acting Grand Duke, Busby, was nowhere to be seen. At this time, several superior nobles worked together to temporarily deal with the mess here. Only these crops were retrieved? In front of the broken transport device, a superior noble couldn't help but frown. There were many members of the escort team who successfully escaped, but this batch of crops was less than half. Most of the crops fell directly into the abyss when they fell and couldn't be rescued in time. Sir, we'll reach the cordon if we go further down. We can't go further. A female vampire of the escort team said with lingering fear, it's almost time for those things to become active, a lost fangs. The superior noble pondered for a while, then shook his head and waved his hand. Record the names of the members of the escort team who were killed. Send the remaining crops back to the farm first. Speaking of this, the superior noble paused and then said, leave 2 people to watch and see if there are any who successfully escaped. The members of the escort team who had just been rescued agreed. But, if they fell into the abyss, could they really come back again? They couldn't help but have doubts in their hearts. There was indeed an incident where the Torito clan went to the abyss below, but that was because there were crops that escaped from the abyss and explained the situation inside in detail. But even so, the clan suffered heavy casualties in that expedition. In the end, the acting Grand Duke relied on the powerful weapon in his hand to bring the clan out. Although that expedition brought back a batch of crops and their descendants that escaped, compared to the casualties of the clan, the benefits were far less than the expenses. My lord, at this moment, a young girl from a crop came to the vampires who were escorting the team in fear. Her face was filled with sadness and fear, and she looked pitiful. Is something the matter? The leader of the escort team recognized the girl's name. She was Lord Babak's favorite crop, and he had asked for her contribution 6 times in a row. Duoni? A young girl, Duoni said worriedly. My lady, Mina hasn't returned yet. Can you go look for her? Mina? The leader was stunned. Duoni hurriedly said, yes, she came with me. We're in the same dorm. She hasn't come back yet. Don't worry. The leader showed a gentle expression and comforted the girl. We'll send someone down there to check. If she's fine, we'll definitely bring her back. Now, you guys go back to the farm and wait for the good news, okay? Okay. Duoni nodded and subconsciously looked at the huge abyss crack that seemed to be able to devour everything. She couldn't help but shiver. After that, some of the crops that survived were taken by the escorts and flew over the abyss fissure between the castle and the cliff to the farm. Somewhere on the edge of the ruined castle, the vampire girl Elizabeth and the third lady of the Zhong family were silently looking at the abyss below. I can't feel Brother Luochio and the others. The vampire girl's face was full of worry as if she was about to cry. There's a very evil will down there. I can't get close. The third lady could only pat the girl's shoulder and comfort her. Don't worry, they'll be fine. Did you forget that guy's ability in the manor last time? Don't stay here. You'll attract the attention of the people of the Teredo clan. Let's leave here first. The vampire girl, who seemed to be in a daze, could only nod. At this time, the castle could no longer be inhabited, at least before it was rebuilt. Therefore, after a joint discussion, the upper nobles of the Teredo clan made a temporary decision to move their clansmen to the Wu farm temporarily. Because of this proposal, almost all the superior nobles directly approved it, so even Beilegan, who was the acting Grand Duke, couldn't reject it. Unless the word acting was removed and he was the real Grand Duke of Teredo. Obviously, Beilegan didn't participate in this trivial matter and even let these superior nobles exert their subjective initiative. Because this acting Grand Duke was dealing with a more important matter at this time, meeting the legendary hero of the war 100 years ago, Kaloya. In the corner of the castle, in a small building that could still be found intact, Kaloya was silently looking through the window at the vampires who were busy like ants outside. Beilegan was sitting quietly at this time. He had briefly talked about what he encountered, but he didn't mention the black card in front of Kaloya. Could it be the Black Soul Envoy? Kaloya touched his sparse hair at this time and frowned. That year, our main force successfully broke into their castle and rushed all the way to the last room. The battle was very chaotic. Who can guarantee that 1 or 2 Black Soul Envoys would be ignored in the chaos? If that's the case, it's fine. Beilegan shook his head at this time. Kaloya, think about it carefully. In the end, can we really defeat the guy with the golden axe? Kaloya muttered. The situation was too chaotic at that time. The elites of the Magician Association basically self-destructed and used powerful forbidden spells at all costs to turn the unbelievably powerful woman into ashes. And we. He looked at Beilegan. That guy also disappeared. Beilegan said, we basically didn't hold back and attacked with all our strength. The castle was finally destroyed and we never saw that guy again. Kaloya paced back and forth and said, the problem is that when the coalition forces collected the spoils of war, they didn't see a single Black Soul Envoy. In the end, the coalition forces even destroyed the castle and the place where it was located, but there was no abnormality. This is the tacit victory, isn't it? Besides, except for Farrell, who seemed to have gone crazy after the war, everything was peaceful for 100 years. Why did it suddenly happen? Are you mistaken, Beilegan? Beilegan said with a wry smile, Kaloya, if it's you, when those guys appear in front of you again, as long as they don't have any intention to hide and only reveal a little bit of their aura, will you be mistaken? I won't. Kaloya shook his head with a solemn expression. Can you describe the appearance of the man and woman you met? I remember you are very good at painting. Beilegan just shook his head. In fact, I can't recall the appearance of the man and woman now. Even their voices. Beilegan, Kaloya's expression changed slightly at this time. He looked straight at Beilegan. After a while, he gulped. I say, are you kidding me? Seeing that this old man is about to die, he planned to give me a farewell party, and then let someone pretend to be the Black Soul emissary, so that I can have a good fight in the end, and finally leave with the identity of a warrior without any worries or something like that. Why didn't I realize that you were so good to me? Is this your idea, or did everyone discuss it without telling me? At this time, the acting Grand Duke of Teredo gently rubbed his forehead. To be honest, Kaloya, I always thought that with your imagination and talent in writing scripts, it was a prank for the creator to let you be born in the werewolf tribe. That's right. The old hero laughed at this time. This Heaven's Star Theater in the inhuman domain is still performing the stage play Purple Love that I wrote when I was young. So, they are really making a comeback. Baligan nodded slightly. I will stay here for a few days, Kaloya suddenly said expressionlessly. Baligan hesitated for a while before asking softly, How much time do you have? The legendary old hero just smiled and said, 1 year or 2 years. That's about it. After that, no one will write your embarrassing things into the script. Are you relieved? Baligan didn't make any comments on this. He just stood up and said indifferently, The castle is no longer suitable for living. I will arrange a quiet place for you in the farm, for a few days. As for the specific matters, let's discuss it again when they are all here. Kaloya leaned against the wall and picked his ear. Here is fine. The wind is cold, the water is cold, and the scenery is good. Your farm smells too much. I'm not used to it. It's up to you. Baligan said indifferently, however, you have to find the food yourself. We don't provide ordinary food here. My inspiration is emerging like spring water. Kaloya shouted with an exaggerated expression at this time. Ah! The image of a vampire Prince Grandet is already vivid in my mind. He may need a male-on-male love story. Baligan slammed the door and left. Seeing this, Kaloya smiled slightly and looked at the afterglow of the sun outside the window. Suddenly, he took out a quill pen and a handbook from his clothes. After dipping the quill pen on the tip of his tongue, Kaloya opened the handbook and began to write something. He whispered to himself, In the end, will there really be a battle? The ending of my life. I say, how about we don't go too far? Corpses and bones were piled up everywhere. In this huge mountain of bones, Miss Witch was constantly paying attention to the movements around her in fear as she made a suggestion. In fact, they were only 100 meters away from the hiding place led by a Norman. As a Norman said, this was the hiding place of a group of humans who escaped from the farm. In addition to the residence built with the corpse of the Red Dragon, Boss Luo also found several similar residences along the way. These residences were also hidden among the skeletons. They needed to search carefully to find their entrances. There are still 20 minutes left, Ms. Maria. Luochu smiled slightly. Smiles could always make people feel at ease. Ms. Witch, who had no immunity to such smiles, sighed and looked up. Under the dim light of the magical algae everywhere, the rocks on both sides of the abyss above seemed to gradually show a rather strange dark purple color. Previously, were these rocks also of this color? Maria asked subconsciously. Purple. Luochu also looked up and thought for a while. It should be red. Red? Ms. Witch couldn't help but be stunned. Miss Maid looked at Ms. Witch at this time and said indifferently, It's a mixture of primary colors. The surrounding algae emits blue light, Ms. Maria Hood. Could you remove the hood, Ms. Witch finally chose to hide this strange surname. Let's go back. I feel a little creepy around here. Just as she spoke, ugly vines began to wriggle from the rock wall above. They were like crawling snakes, slowly spreading down along the rock wall from above. If one looked carefully, one would find that these vines were like blood vessels, contracting and expanding regularly. Didn't you say there are still 20 minutes left? Maria's voice trembled at this time. Boom! At this moment, about 10 meters away from them, a pile of bones that was several meters tall suddenly exploded. A huge thing that was as thick as 2 people suddenly shot out from the ground. Instead of calling it a vine, it would be better to call it a giant sandworm. At its front end, there was a round mouth filled with sharp teeth. F***CK. At this moment, Ms. Witch didn't care about her feminine modesty. She quickly reached into her collar and kept taking things out, but it seemed that she didn't find anything useful. Miss Maid naturally walked a few steps forward and blocked in front of Boss Luo. She turned her palm outwards and a bunch of black flames quietly came out. Wait! Luochu suddenly held Yu Ye's wrist at this time. As he spoke, He saw something falling rapidly from above. It seemed to be a figure. In an instant, this rapidly falling figure directly hit the huge vine, and even hit the thick vine. Boom! The falling figure finally smashed into the ground, raising a large amount of mud and dust. At the same time, the fluctuation also loosened the surrounding piles of bones, and the bones began to fall down. In the dust, only a coughing sound was heard. It seemed to be a woman's voice. Chapter 1341. Miss Witch was still rummaging through the private goods hidden in her collar, but she still couldn't find anything useful. But at this moment, a coughing sound came from the place where the dust rose, and a figure gradually walked out. Where is this place? It was a beauty that was difficult to describe with words. Even though she was somewhat disheveled and her face was stained with a lot of dust, it still couldn't hide her beauty. If she could clean herself up, to what extent would this beauty reach? Maria couldn't help but ponder for a moment. She believed that there was an upper limit to beauty. Once it reached a certain level, such as the upper limit of the definition of beauty, it was very likely that it would be more or less the same. For example, she couldn't tell who the beauties on the internet were. To remember dozens or even hundreds of thousands of names with the same face was simply mental pollution. So there was an upper limit to physical beauty, and only different people's temperament could break this limit. For example, the mysterious and dreamy temperament of Master Prismatic Pansy, or Little Brother Luacio's smile that could heal people's hearts, were the only ones that broke the limit of physical beauty, making it unforgettable. Admittedly, this slightly disheveled beauty also had an indescribable special temperament. But it seemed to be different from the typical vampires? Miss Witch's hand was still in the position of reaching into her collar, and then she stared straight at the beauty who slowly walked out. Beauty? Fafnir frowned slightly, and first looked up, seemingly a little surprised, and then began to look at the three people in front of him. It didn't matter, but once it saw the golden dragon with a special fetish, its gaze was somewhat fixed. Of course, even this fixed gaze was still very elegant. There's actually someone more beautiful than me in this world? At this moment, the golden dragon's thoughts were almost stagnant, as if it was difficult to wake up from this shock. Just like that, it silently looked at the three people in front of it. Excuse me, did you encounter any difficulties? It was Boss Luo who took the initiative to open this silent situation. He seemed to be getting better at opening up discordant atmospheres. The moment he opened his mouth to speak, Fafnir's pupils suddenly shrank imperceptibly. I saw it. I saw it. It was just a short moment, but with the golden dragon's super eyesight, it really saw it clearly. In that almost perfect neck, when it spoke, it moved slightly, a man's, Adam's apple. Oh my God! Not only, she's as beautiful as me, but also the same attribute as me? In the vast sea of people, how could there be such a wonderful encounter? Oh, this is the feeling of's heart. Only he can understand me. This kind of gentle gaze that seems to be able to accept Isa's heart. It didn't know if it was because the effects of the medicine given by the wise Eastern true dragon had not completely disappeared, or because Cupid's prank arrow had hit it at this time. But for a moment, he was in a dilemma. On the one hand, it was a hero who had displayed his masculine charm to the extreme. Not only did his charm not diminish because of time, but it was also like a fine wine, becoming more and more mellow because of time. On the other hand, this was his own kind, a beautiful person who could be his soul mate. Why do I have to meet two people who make my heart beat in just half a day? It should be double the joy. But why do I have this kind of trouble? This fellow, could it be that he injured his head when he fell down? It had been a while since Boss Luo spoke, but the beautiful person in front of him didn't answer. What was more amazing was that he began to drool. That indescribable temperament disappeared instantly. Hearing this, Miss Maid and her master looked at each other. Boss Luo asked again, "Excuse me, are you in any trouble?" Fafnir suddenly sobered up. The speed at which his face changed was comparable to the special effects of a certain drama. He once again regained his indescribable beauty. Then, holding his heart, he sorrowfully said, I am a person who has fallen into a whirlpool of two outstanding people and cannot choose between them. Ha! Luocchio opened his mouth. Such an answer was a bit original. It sounds like a really troublesome thing. You also think so, right? Fafner walked slowly. You also agree that love is the most difficult enemy to defeat in the world, right? His eyes were bright and piercing. Why does this gaze seem so familiar? Boss Luo frowned subconsciously. There was nothing wrong with his words, but he felt something was wrong. However, since the beginning in the castle, he had blocked Miss Maid's perception and his own. Although he habitually wanted to buy information, he quickly restrained himself. The rules of this game were set by himself. Naturally, there was no reason for him to violate the rules. He had been in the state for a long time where he could get all the knowledge and information as long as he wanted. In order to prevent himself from getting too used to this state and eventually losing interest in everything, it was better to keep things unknown and mysterious from time to time. But it was a disguised way to find some harmless fun for himself, praying that he would not lose interest in everything. In the end, even the brightest soul would become dim. Because of blocking the other party's perception, Miss Maid could only roughly judge the strength of the other party based on her experience and her own ability. She already knew the general strength. There was no danger to speak of. As for other information such as identity information, interpersonal relationships, personality and so on, it was temporarily unknown. But since the master wanted to play such a small game, Miss Maid naturally had no objection. It was just to pass the time. I say, it seems that now is not the time to chat? The witch could not help but kindly remind both parties. We seem to still be in danger? Around them, strange vines had already wriggled to them, as if they had broken into a snake's nest. That's right. This atmosphere is really not suitable for the scene of meeting you for the first time. The golden dragon slowly nodded. No one, please wait a moment, I'll clear these filthy things soon. Boss Luo blinked. What? Miss Maid narrowed her eyes. Miss Witch opened her mouth. At this time, the golden dragon raised the corner of his mouth and stretched out his palm. Then he bent his fingers and snapped his fingers. In an instant, the fire rose to the sky. Circles of red fire were generated on the ground. Those vines were ignited by the fire and then burned out in the red flame. But in an instant it was directly cleared out. As for the vines that continued to extend behind them, as if they had encountered something dangerous, they slowly retreated. Not long after, they gradually retreated to the rock wall and then disappeared. When the flames subsided, although the surroundings were still filled with bones, at least the threat was temporarily removed. So powerful! Miss Witch instantly widened her eyes. Although most of the legendary creatures and famous heroes of the Western world were hidden in the inhuman domain, it was actually quite rare to see them on normal days. Why did she suddenly encounter one? This made Miss Witch couldn't help but fall into contemplation. It had only been half a day since she entered the inhuman domain. Why did she feel that she encountered one thing after another, as if it would not stop? Obviously, in such a short time, it would pass by unknowingly if she took a nap and ate some snack. At this time, these things are quite clever. The golden dragon chuckled and then brushed his hair. Well, the things in the way are gone. We can have a deeper conversation, beauty. Luocchio. Boss Luo said politely, this is my name. Also, because of some other reasons, I am temporarily in this disguise. I understand. Unexpectedly, the golden dragon nodded seriously at this time. Don't worry, I understand. I will never make fun of you because… Suddenly, he was interrupted. What happened? A figure flew over quickly. It was the vampire named Norman who was hiding in the Red Dragon skeleton house. At this time, He frowned and looked at the surrounding environment and the woman who suddenly appeared in front of him. He was especially vigilant. Fafnir frowned. The man who appeared in front of him was quite handsome and could enter his eyes, but sorry, there was already Sir Crowloy and the beauty Luaccio. He couldn't be distracted any more. Who is this? However, the golden dragon had to maintain his elegant posture in front of the beauty. So he asked indifferently, "Seeing that you're also quite pretty, I'll forgive you for interrupting me. If there were no two ugly women next to you, it would be better. We met him on the way." Luaccio smiled and said, "Thanks to him, we can find a temporary hiding place in this dangerous place." The golden dragon nodded at this time, then looked at Norman seriously. Seeing that his eyes were quite clear, and when he looked at the beauty Luaccio, there was a faint sense of vigilance, he was quite satisfied. "Well, as long as he doesn't also like the beauty Luaccio, we can be friends after this." After making up his mind, the golden dragon smiled faintly. He smiled slightly. "If I'm not wrong, this should be a lost crack. These ugly things are the so-called lost fangs?" Busby frowned even deeper. Lost fangs was not a special secret in the clan, and there were many Inhumans in the outside world who knew about it, but there were not many who would be relaxed about lost fangs. "You are." The golden dragon lifted his skirt at this time and introduced himself with a flirtatious posture. "Nice to meet you. My name is Milo. Beauty, if you can call me Milo-chan, that would be even better." "Milo? Milo-chan?" Hearing this name, Miss Witch couldn't help but be startled, then she opened her mouth and said subconsciously, Biling? Milo-chan? You are the special relationship columnist in Inhuman newspaper. Biling, the shiny Milo-chan teacher? You know me." The golden dragon was quite surprised. Miss Witch nodded vigorously at this time. "Of course. I am your loyal reader. Look, I have carefully collected every issue of your column. When I have nothing to do, I will read through it again and again. Because I am still single even at the age of a mature woman, I specially studied the matters of love." "I see." The golden dragon nodded. He had always directly chased away ugly women. Seeing that this was an unaccompanied reader, the golden dragon directly waved his finger at this time. The flames suddenly calcined on Maria's robe, but it disappeared in an instant. After that, a hollow signature burned by the flames had been printed on the clothes on Maria's abdomen. "Then keep it as a souvenir." The golden dragon smiled slightly. "I will treasure it for a lifetime. Milo-chan teacher." Miss Witch hugged her abdomen as if she was on a pilgrimage. "I will never throw away this dress for the rest of my life. It can be enhanced, right? The fortune of love. This is Milo-chan teacher's autograph. If there's nothing else, let's go back first." Norman suddenly interrupted everyone at this time. "Those things are about to reach their most active time. If you don't want to trouble yourself, don't continue this kind of chatter." Boss Lua nodded, then looked at Miss Maid and smiled. "Then let's go back." Then he naturally held Miss Maid's hand. After greeting everyone, he followed Norman's footsteps and walked toward the house with the red dragon skeleton. Miss Witch, who was about to catch up, looked back and saw her idol Milo-chan standing there as if she had been petrified. Her whole body was trembling and she looked stunned. "Milo-chan teacher. Milo-chan teacher." Miss Witch walked to her side at this time and hesitantly patted her shoulder. "Teacher? Ah." The golden dragon was suddenly shocked, then stretched out his finger and pointed ahead with trembling fingers. They, what is their relationship? Lovers? Miss Witch subconsciously said, "Don't mention this lovey-dovey couple. I can vomit from all the PDA I've eaten today. Teacher, let's talk about Pisces' love luck this week." "Teacher, I always feel that my love this week is not going well." Teacher? Lovers. The golden dragon suddenly sat on the ground at this time, lowered his head and said to himself, "Oh, is this a test for me? I've never tried to snatch someone's love.